Good evening, dear listener, and welcome to a journey back through time. In this gentle tale, we will wander slowly into the medieval night, exploring the curious and quiet corners of daily life long ago. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the soft glow of imagination to light the way. Together, we'll drift through drafty castle halls and humble village cottages, through monastery cloisters and moonlit fields, discovering the weird and wonderful sleep habits of medieval people. As strange as some of these habits might seem, we will find that they all served a purpose in their world, and each will be shared with a calm, peaceful tone to lull you toward rest. Before we begin our chaptered voyage, take a deep, slow breath. Imagine the faint crackle of an hearth's embers and the gentle hush that falls over a village at dusk. The bustling medieval day is ending. Peasants finish their chores as twilight fades. Castle dwellers retire from feasting to seek warmth and slumber. Monks whisper final prayers in the chapel. The world grows still. In this stillness, we can safely explore the peculiar routines and secret rules that guided knightly life in the Middle Ages. There will be no loud battles or frightening scenes here, only the soft padding of bare feet on wooden floors, the distant owl's hoot, and the murmured prayers and lullabies of a bygone era. Soon, we will peek into a dimly lit medieval cottage where an entire family nestles together on a straw mattress, perhaps with a beloved cow or goat dozing nearby for warmth. We'll tiptoe through a great lord's castle, where dozens of servants curl up by the kitchen hearth, and the noble family draws bed curtains against the cold. We'll listen to the midnight sounds of monks rising from their beds to chant in stone abbeys, and learn about the rhythms of first sleep and second sleep that were once as common as night and day. By candlelight, we'll discover why medieval people feared night demons sitting on their chests in bad dreams, and how they warded off these spirits with prayers and herbs. We'll wander through chapters on castle etiquette, monastic silence, peasant traditions, and old remedies for better sleep, all the while keeping a slow and soothing pace. Our goal is not only to learn a little history, but to relax and perhaps even drift off as people have done for centuries at day's end. If your mind starts to wander or your eyes grow heavy, that's perfectly fine. Let the meditative descriptions carry you gently, like a lullaby of facts and fables. Each chapter will unfold calmly, filled with rich sensory language to paint the scene. The scent of beeswax candles and lavender, the feel of woolen blankets and rough-hewn wood, the muffled sound of chapel bells at dawn. So let's begin this peaceful historical journey. Take another slow breath and feel the quiet of the past surround you. In the darkness beyond your closed eyes, a tiny point of warm light appears, perhaps a torch on a castle wall, or a lantern carried by a village watchman. Follow that light now, as it leads us into the first chapter of our story, the unusual sleep habits of medieval villages and castles. Settle in, relax, and enjoy this boring history, the kind of soft, gentle storytelling that just might help you sleep. Unusual sleep habits in medieval villages and castles. In the medieval world, nighttime often meant togetherness. Privacy was a luxury few could afford, so it was common for people to sleep in groups, sometimes in ways we might find quite unusual today. Imagine a small timber-framed cottage in a village as the stars rise overhead. Inside the one-room hut, a peasant family is preparing for bed. The air smells of wood smoke from the central hearth, and the faint warmth of the fire is the only thing warding off the chill. There is no separate bedroom, just a single, multi-purpose space with earthen floor and walls of woven sticks daubed with mud. In one corner, piled high with straw and old blankets, lies the family's simple bed. Tonight, as on every night, the parents, children, and maybe a grandparent or two will all share this bed or the floor around it. They spread out a coarse woolen blanket and make room for everyone. In many such cottages, even the animals shared the space. About a third of the hut might be penned off for a commendage. Cow, goats, or a few chickens living right alongside the family. This wasn't merely out of affection. The body heat of a cow is like a living furnace, giving off warmth on a freezing night. In a poorly insulated hut, with wind whistling through cracks, bringing the livestock indoors was a practical way to stay warm and safe. So if you peeked into a medieval peasant home at night, you might see a mother and father drifting to sleep with a baby in their arms, older children snuggled close, and a drowsy cow chewing cud just a few steps away, its presence as normal as a modern radiator. The bedding in a medieval home was humble but comforting in its own way. A common family might have a bed that was nothing more than a thick layer of straw or dried reeds spread on the ground, sometimes called a pallet. If they were a bit better off, they might have a wooden bed frame to contain the straw mattress. Either way, the mattress was usually a large sack or tick stuffed with straw, hay, or wool scraps. Each night, the family would fluff and shake it, the origin of the phrase, hit the hay, for going to bed, to remove bugs and redistribute the stuffing. The blanket on top could be a patched quilt of old cloth or simply animal furs in winter. Pillows were a rarity for working folk. Maybe a bundled cloak or sack served the purpose. As they settled down, children might whisper or giggle for a moment, but soon the darkness and fatigue from a long day of labor would quiet everyone. The only sounds are the low crackle of the fire's last embers and the soft breathing of humans and animals alike. It's worth noting that such communal sleeping wasn't considered strange to medieval people at all. It was simply how life was. A traveller stopping at a village inn would likewise expect to share a bed with strangers if space was scarce. Inns often had large beds accommodating multiple guests, or a whole common loft with straw where everyone found a spot. Personal space was limited. Warmth and safety in numbers took priority. If the occasional piglet or chicken wandered near the sleeping area, that was just part of the rural nighttime scene. Now contrast this with the scene in a medieval castle at bedtime. You might think of castles as spacious, with many rooms, but in the early Middle Ages, even castles offered little privacy. A great lord's castle typically had one main hall that was the center of life, and perhaps a couple of smaller chambers. As night fell, that great hall turned into a giant dormitory. Picture a grand, high-ceilinged room of stone, the fire in the central hearth glowing faintly. The lord and his family would not disappear to distant quarters. Instead, they often slept at one end of the great hall itself. In many castles, the noble family's sleeping area was simply the raised platform, the dais, at the end of the hall, perhaps screened by a thick curtain. If they were fortunate, there might be a wooden partition separating their space from the rest of the hall. Behind that curtain, the lord and lady had their own bed, a large and splendid one compared to a peasant straw pile. A sturdy wooden four-poster bed, its frame held together by ropes crisscrossed to support a feather mattress, was the pride of the household. The mattress could be stuffed with down feathers for softness, and the bed was draped with a canopy and heavy curtains. These curtains weren't just for show. At night, they could be drawn close to keep warmth in and provide a modicum of privacy. The noble family would have pillows, perhaps embroidered, linen sheets if they could afford them, and layers of coverings, woolen blankets, and even luxurious fur throws to ward off the bitter cold. Castles were notoriously drafty and cold, so every bit of insulation helped. Tapestries hung on the stone walls to cut down drafts, and carpets or rushes on the floor kept feet warmer. On especially frigid nights, servants might slide a brass pan of hot coals or heated stones under the bed covers to pre-warm them, essentially a medieval bed warmer, since there were no rubber hot water bottles in those days. Just beyond that curtain, the rest of the hall was filled with the lord's household, knights, squires, servants, guards, all the people who lived and worked in the castle. Where did they sleep? Virtually anywhere they could find a spot. As the hour grew late, servants would spread out simple pallets on the floor or unroll mats near the hearth. Benches that had been sat on during supper might now serve as hard beds for a few folks. Some climbed to the loft or gallery above the hall, if one existed, or even tucked themselves into niches along the walls. Others might sleep in front of the kitchen fireplace for a cozy spot, or huddle near the dogs for a little extra warmth. In early medieval castles, it was not uncommon to see dozens of people bedding down in the great hall together. Men, women, children, and the inevitable scurrying mice and roaming house cats that kept partial watch on the rodent population. A visitor to such a castle described it as curling up with the rats, an unromantic reality that many had to accept. Castles, for all their strength, could be cold, noisy, and even smelly places at night. The rushes strewn on the floor for cleanliness and fragrance would over time accumulate bits of spilled food, ale, and general grime. No one swept every day, so there was a certain musty odor mixed with the scent of herbs in those halls. Servants wrapped themselves in cloaks or coarse wool blankets, or even slept in their daytime clothes to stay warm. If you were lucky, you claimed a spot near the fire or next to a comrade. If not, you might spend the night shivering on the cold stone floor, inching closer to the nearest body for shared warmth. Personal beds were not assigned. It was first come, first served when it came to choosing a sleeping place from the floor. Despite these seemingly uncomfortable arrangements, medieval people took it in stride. Remember, privacy as we know it was scarce. In a castle hall, everyone was aware of everyone else. You could hear your neighbor snoring or coughing, and if a couple under one of those distant bed curtains got amorous or a child fussed in the night, well, that was accepted as part of life. Absolutely no privacy. One modern writer notes of castle nights. Everybody knew what was going on with everybody. It was considered normal, not rude, because there was simply no alternative. People were used to the communal atmosphere and learned to mind their own business. Even if a few blankets over in the darkness, someone was whispering or shifting restlessly. Interestingly, one weird habit that might catch our modern attention is that some medieval sleepers, especially among the nobility, preferred to sleep sitting up or propped at an angle rather than lying flat. If you've ever seen a very short bed in a medieval castle exhibit and wondered why it's not adult-sized, the reason often given is a mix of superstition and comfort. There was a belief, or at least a customary notion, that lying completely flat on your back was the posture of a corpse, and it was best to avoid imitating death during sleep. To ward off any bad luck or perhaps metaphysical confusion with the departed, people might prop themselves up with pillows or bolsters. Also, sleeping partially upright could alleviate issues like indigestion or acid reflux from those heavy evening meals. So, A noble person might drift off while half reclined against a padded headboard, rather than snoring flat on their back. The short length of some antique beds suggests that they did not stretch out fully. They might bend their knees or use a backrest, resulting in a semi-seated slumber that to them felt safer or more respectable. Imagine a lord in his four-poster, nodding off against a mound of pillows, candlelight flickering on the embroidered bed curtains. He might even be wearing a nightcap, not the alcoholic kind, but an actual cap on his head, to keep warm and keep his hair clean, as pillows and linens were not washed frequently. In better-off households, aristocratic manors, or later medieval homes of merchants, we start to see trundle beds or pallets for servants and children. A trundle is a low bed on small wheels or simply a low frame that could be slid under the main bed during the day. At night, it was pulled out for use. A lord's personal attendant or a favoured squire might sleep on a trundle bed at the foot of the lord's own, ready to assist if needed. The existence of these secondary beds meant not everyone had to be on the floor, but space was still shared tightly. If the castle was crowded with guests, the phrase, "every nook and cranny," truly applied. One could find people sleeping in corridors, inside the castle's gatehouse, or up in the towers. The guards on duty in the towers or gate might wrap in cloaks and catnap in shifts, always keeping one ear open for danger, even as they tried to rest. For peasants, the nightly routine was simpler, but perhaps even more crowded. We left the peasant family settling in with their cow. Let's rejoin them for a moment. The father has banked the fire, meaning he covered the hot coals with ash to make them last until morning, without burning brightly, a safety measure and fuel saver. The only light is a faint orange glow and maybe a small clay lamp fueled by tallow, animal fat, or oil. Such a lamp gives off a smoky, pungent smell and a weak flame. They will likely extinguish it soon to preserve precious oil. The darkness in a countryside hut is nearly absolute, punctuated only by moonlight, if it filters through gaps or the little hole in the roof that lets smoke escape. The family says their prayers, perhaps a simple, "God keep us this night," or a recitation of the prayers, Lord's Prayer, and each person finds their spot on the family bed. If there is a grandfather with achy joints, maybe he sits propped by the wall. Toddlers sprawl wherever they please. An older child might even bed down in the loft above the rafters, if the house has one, nestled in hay. They have no feather beds or cushions, just that straw mattress, which crackles a bit as bodies shift. Inevitably, bedbugs and lice share these sleeping arrangements too. Medieval records and analyses note that bedding was often riddled with insects, and people would have regarded a few bug bites in the night as normal. A little scratching and sighing might be heard before everyone finally drifts off. Odd as it sounds, many medieval families likely got used to the gentle background noises of animals and other people as a lullaby of sorts. The rhythmic breathing of a cow, or the soft clucking of hens settling on their perch, could be comforting. And in a world without furnaces or space, heaters, the combined warmth of many bodies in a small space was an asset. If you were alone in a room, you'd feel the cold far more. So there was wisdom in these communal sleep habits. They kept people warm and perhaps even emotionally reassured in a dark age when night could be frightening. As you picture these scenes, the crowded castle hall, with its tapestry-draped bed and snoring retainers, and the tiny cottage with family and beasts slumbering together, you might notice how quiet the medieval night could be. There were no cars honking, no electrical hum from appliances. Once everyone settled, an almost primordial silence fell, broken only by natural sounds. wind moaning through castle arrow slits, a wolf howling in the distant woods, the shuffle of hooves as the livestock adjusted in their pen. Maybe a guard coughs, or a baby whimpers briefly. Otherwise, a deep peace reigns in these pre-industrial bedrooms. In our next chapter, we will gently explore what happened after these medieval people fell asleep. Strangely enough, they often didn't sleep in one long stretch, like most do today. They had what's called segmented sleep, a first sleep and second sleep, with a quiet, wakeful period in between. We will also meet the watchmen of the night, the guards and town constables who stayed awake so others could rest safely. So let us tiptoe into midnight in the Middle Ages, where a candle or two still burns and some souls stir while others slumber. Keep relaxed as we continue, knowing that even in the darkness, all is well in these sleepy old scenes. Night watches, segmented sleep, and candlelit midnight routines. It's the middle of the night in a medieval town. The church bell has long since tolled the evening curfew, and the narrow streets are dark and empty. All honest folk are supposed to be at home now, with their fires banked and doors bolted. In fact, many towns had laws requiring a curfew, from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire, where at a set hour, a bell would ring to signal that everyone should extinguish open flames and settle in for the night. This was both to prevent accidental fires in tightly packed wooden houses and to discourage mischief or crime under cover of darkness. So, as the bell's echoes fade, shutters are closed and a hush falls over the marketplace. Only a few figures remain awake, the night watchmen. Envision a pair of them patrolling the cobbled lanes, carrying lanterns that sway gently and cast long shadows on the stone walls. They wear warm cloaks and perhaps carry a stick or staff as they make their rounds. Every so often, one calls out an hour or a phrase into the still air, a reassurance to townsfolk and a warning to wrongdoers that the watch is on duty. In some places, watchmen would indeed announce, "All's well, 12 o'clock, and all's well," or give a horn blast to mark the time habits that became more common in later centuries. Their duties are simple: deter thieves and burglars, keep an eye out for fires, and challenge anyone wandering at odd hours. If a person with no clear purpose is found abroad in the night, the watchmen are empowered to stop them. In medieval England, night watch statutes allowed arresting those out after curfew without good reason. Only someone with legitimate business, perhaps a midwife heading to a birth, or a messenger on urgent errand, should be out so late. The watchman's lantern light glints off the quiet windows and the puddles in the street. A stray cat slinks by. For the most part, it is a peaceful, if lonely vigil. These watchmen must fight sleepiness themselves, perhaps stamping their feet in the cool night air to stay alert. They know that within the houses around them, their neighbors lie curled in slumber, trusting the watch to guard the sleeping town. Back in the countryside or the castle, there were also those who stayed awake while others slept. On a castle's ramparts, guards paced slowly, eyes scanning the starry horizon for any sign of threat. They might work in shifts through the night, 2 hours on, then a swap with a comrade, so each man could catch some shut-eye. If you were on watch, you'd rely on the silence. Any unusual sound, a clank of armor, footsteps, a horse's whinny outside the wall, would prickle your attention. But often, nothing alarming happened, and a guard's night was spent communing quietly with the cold and the constellations above. Some castles employed a night watchman internally as well, someone to wander the dark halls with a lantern, making sure no candles were accidentally left, burning near drapes, or that no drunk guest had knocked over a lamp. Fire was the great fear in any community, especially within a castle or town where buildings were close. Thus, these watchers served as medieval firefighters in a preventative sense, sniffing the air for smoke and double-checking that hearth embers were banked safely. One might imagine a castle watchman gently closing a shutter that had blown open in the wind, or picking up a candle someone forgot to snuff, all while the rest of the household snored away on their pallets. While the watchmen do their rounds, let's step into the homes again, because something rather unique about medieval sleep often occurred in the middle of the night. Unlike the modern ideal of a single 7 to 8 hour stretch of sleep, many pre-industrial societies, including medieval Europe, experienced segmented sleep. A first sleep, sometimes called dead sleep or just first sleep, for a few hours, then a period of wakefulness around midnight, and then a second sleep until morning. This was considered normal, so normal that the phrases first sleep prime somnia in Latin or premier sommeil in Old French, and second sleep appear in literature and letters of the time. Typically, a medieval person might fall asleep a couple of hours after dusk, say around 9 p.m. in winter, and sleep until roughly midnight. Then, like clockwork, they would awaken. But rather than being upset by this insomnia, they knew it to be a natural pause. What did people do during that quiet interval after first sleep? Many things, all gentle and mostly done in the dark or by faint candlelight. Some folks stayed in bed and used the time for prayer or contemplation. It was widely recommended as a perfect moment to say additional prayers, and indeed, medieval prayer books sometimes provided special devotions upon waking from first sleep. Lying there under their blankets, they might softly recite a psalm or say an Ave Maria, thanking God for the rest already given and asking protection for the rest of the night. Others might converse in whispers with their bedfellows. There are accounts of people who use the midnight wakeful hour to share dreams they just had, or to discuss family matters in the kind of unguarded, cozy way that nighttime encourages. In one 16th century description, a bit after the medieval period, but reflecting older patterns, couples were said to be intimate in this interval, having more enjoyment after the first sleep, when their energies were rejuvenated and the day's worries had ebbed. Indeed, a French physician named Laurent Joubert noted that rural labourers often conceived children during the middle of the night. Pause. Perhaps because they were more refreshed than at the end of a long workday. In a cottage, one or two family members might get up from bed entirely. Perhaps an elderly parent with aching joints rises to poke the fire back to life, adding a bit of wood to warm the room. The dim red glow brightens to orange as small flames dance up, casting moving shadows on the walls. Maybe the person takes this opportunity to step outside for a moment. Nature's call does not respect the clock. After all, stepping out the door, they feel the cold night air and see the village common sleeping under moonlight. The world is hushed. Overhead, the Milky Way spills across the sky, for with no light pollution, it glimmers brilliantly. Our villager might take a moment to gaze at the stars, breathe deeply, and then return indoors to the family bed. These few minutes of solitude and quiet thought are a brief nightly respite from life's toil. In some cases, people did small chores during this waking period. A diary from the 15th century might mention a housewife who, upon waking at midnight, remembered that the dough set to rise for tomorrow's bread needed checking. So she creeps to the kitchen area, tends to her dough, maybe covers it with a cloth against drafts, and in doing so feels productive in her otherwise still night. Or a farmer might quietly step out to make sure the barn's gate is secure, or to check on a labouring ewe. Sheep often give birth at inconvenient hours. These tasks were done by the faintest of light, perhaps from an oil lamp, or just embers carried on an iron pan to act as a makeshift lantern. The pace of such tasks was slow and unhurried. There was no sense of fully starting the day yet. It was more like an intermission in sleep. Interestingly, this midnight wakefulness was sometimes viewed as a good time for spiritual reflection and even creativity. The stillness and the half-dreamy state of mind could lend itself to insights or poetic thoughts. A medieval person might contemplate a dream they just had, wondering if it held a message. They could also be vulnerable to superstitions at this hour. The veil between worlds was thought thin at night, so perhaps they would murmur a charm against any lurking evil before lying back down. But by and large, people seem to have used the time constructively, or at least contentedly. After about an hour or two, they would feel drowsy again and sink into their second sleep, which would last until dawn. So normal was this pattern that an English proverb noted, someone was sleeping like a hare if they skipped their second sleep, implying a restlessness contrary to custom. We can imagine, for instance, a small scenario, a medieval baker's household. They went to bed after the evening prayers, slept deeply for 4 hours, and now around midnight, the baker's wife has risen. She wraps a shawl around her shoulders and quietly kindles a small rushlight, a type of candle made from the pith of a rush plant dipped in fat. By its flicker, she checks the sourdough she set aside earlier. It's nicely risen. In fact, it's time to bake. Bakers often kept odd hours to have fresh bread by morning. So, perhaps she kneads the dough a bit, divides it, and places loaves near the hearth to bake slowly. The room smells faintly of yeast and wood smoke. Her husband, half awake, sits up and keeps her company, the two chatting softly about small domestic concerns. When the bread is done enough to leave, they bank the fire again, share a cup of small ale, or maybe warm spiced wine from a jug, and then return to bed for their second sleep, the gentle aroma of baked bread filling their dreams. Even those in castles or monasteries followed this segmented rhythm. Monks, as we'll see in a later chapter, had a very regimented night that included a deliberate waking period for prayers, matins and lauds. But even a castle's lord might naturally awaken after a few hours. If he was educated or pious, he might keep a devotional book by the bed, perhaps illuminated with calming images of saints, to read by the light of a taper for a short while. Or he might simply lie there, listening to the quiet, maybe hearing the distant footfall of the guard outside, or the howl of a wolf beyond the moat. Some aristocrats even wrote letters or composed music in the wee hours, taking advantage of the tranquility. But for most, the gap between first and second sleep was not overly long, just enough to stir, reflect, or do a minor task, and then doze off again. As the night wears on and moves past this midpoint, the world plunges into its deepest slumber. After the watchman's last round, even he might find a corner to sit and rest his eyes for a few minutes. The town's guardian has noticed all is well. No glint of flames, no shout of alarm, and so he leans against a doorway, lantern at his feet, permitting himself a light doze. In a castle, the midnight guard shift changes. Fresh eyes take over on the battlements, while those relieved gratefully seek their beds. The households that woke for a bit have resumed their repose, This pattern of biphasic sleep was so common across medieval Europe that it was essentially universal, not just in winter when nights were long, but year-round. Scholars note that without strong artificial lighting, human bodies naturally time themselves to have this two-part sleep during the long, dark hours. For us today, it might sound disruptive to wake up in the middle of the night, but medieval people likely found it normal and even restful. A medical text of the time might advise that the interval between first and second sleep was a healthy time to absorb nutrients or let the body digest. Indeed, some recommended waiting to have intercourse until after first sleep for better chances of conception, as mentioned earlier. People didn't stress about being awake. They took it as a natural rhythm of night, and indeed, when they felt sleepy again, they would drift into their morning sleep, which could last until the cock's crow or the break of day. As the night slowly wanes, imagine the very early pre-dawn hours in a medieval setting. There is a particular cold that often comes just before sunrise, as if the world is at its darkest and chilliest point. The second sleep of medieval people might be especially deep in those last hours. Cottages are utterly dark, their fires nearly out. Castles are mostly silent except for an occasional rustle as someone turns over beneath a cloak. Around this time, some might stir once more, especially those who had duties at dawn, like servants who must prepare the hearths or feed animals as soon as light comes. They might not fully rise yet, but their bodies start to sense the nearness of morning. If a person had a particularly long night, such as in winter, when darkness could last 14 hours, they may even squeeze in a third light asleep, or just lounge in a half-awake reverie, waiting for the first hint of dawn in the sky. One lovely image to hold is that of a medieval person waking from their second sleep naturally when they hear the first rooster crow. Almost every village and farm had roosters, and these feathery timekeepers often signaled the approach of day. Also, many church bells rang at matins, or lauds, the early morning prayers, around daybreak. So, as the east slowly paled, you'd eventually hear a bell tolling from the local church or monastery, carrying over the misty fields. This sound gently pulled people from sleep, a far cry from jarring alarm clocks. They might yawn, stretch their limbs, easing the stiffness from a night on a firm straw bed, and whisper a quick thanks to God for preserving them through the dangers of darkness. Outside, the watchmen would be ending their patrol, perhaps meeting the first early risers already heading to market or pasture. Thus, the medieval night was not one unbroken span of unconsciousness, but a dynamic, almost alive experience, with its own watchful guardians, its own routine interlude for wakeful peace, and its sacred quiet hours. The practice of segmented sleep would continue in many places until artificial lighting and modern schedules gradually altered our patterns in the last few centuries. But in the chapters ahead, as we explore other aspects of medieval life at night, keep in mind this gentle rhythm of first and second sleep. It underlies many of the habits we'll discuss, from midnight prayer to the timing of certain rituals. For now, take comfort in the idea that in those times, waking up at 2 a.m. wasn't a cause for anxiety, but almost expected. A medieval person might even be puzzled by our quest for an uninterrupted 8-hour sleep. They might say, "But then when would you ponder in the midnight hush, or stoke the coals, or whisper with your loved one while the rest of the world sleeps?" There can be a special serenity in those moments, as they well knew. Our journey continues to another peculiar topic: hygiene and bathing, or the lack thereof. in medieval bedtime routines? How did people clean themselves, or not, before sleep? Were there nighttime bathing rituals, or did folks simply collapse into bed dirty from the day's labours? We will find that medieval attitudes toward cleanliness were quite different from today's, but they were not entirely ignorant of hygiene. Let's gently wash our hands of the darkness and step into the next chapter, keeping our voice to a whisper so as not to wake the sleepers still lingering in their second rest. Hygiene and bathing rituals, or lack thereof. As dawn breaks on our medieval village or castle, perhaps it's a good time to consider how people approached hygiene and bathing, especially in relation to sleep and daily rituals. In our modern world, many of us have an evening routine, a warm shower, brushing teeth, changing into clean pajamas to feel fresh before bed. Medieval people, however, lived in a time before indoor plumbing, before antibacterial soaps, or even the germ theory of disease. Their ideas of cleanliness were shaped by very different beliefs and practical limitations. Yet, contrary to the common myth that everyone in the Middle Ages was completely filthy, they did practice personal hygiene in their own ways, albeit less frequently and thoroughly than we do. Let's start in a simple peasant home at the end of a workday. Our peasant family has spent long hours in the fields or tending animals. They are dirty, hands calloused and grimy, feet bare and dusty, sweat dried on their brows. Do they bathe before bed? The answer is usually not a full bath, not daily. Water had to be hauled from the well or river by hand, then heated over a fire if a warm wash was desired. Such effort was spent occasionally, but not every night. However, medieval people did value basic hygiene. They commonly washed their hands and face daily, often before meals and certainly after toil, as they knew the value of removing visible dirt. A bowl of water might be kept near the door or the hearth for quick rinses. In fact, even the poorest expected to, top and tail, wash the face and neck, and the hands and feet, at least with water and a rag, if not with soap, on a regular basis. The idea of a full-body immersion bath every evening would have seemed excessive and impractical to them, but they were not wholly indifferent to cleanliness. So, a peasant preparing for sleep might take a damp cloth and wipe the day's dust from their face. Perhaps they'll scrub their cracked hands, rinsing off soil and sweat. In warm weather, maybe they even step outside to a rain barrel and pour a little cool water over their feet, soothing them after walking barefoot in the fields. If they own a bit of lye soap, a harsh homemade soap, they'll use it on particularly dirty spots, though that soap might be saved more for laundry than frequent skin use, as it could be quite drying. Once suitably refreshed by this minimal wash, they dry off with a coarse linen towel, or just let the air dry them, and then lie down to rest. For most labourers, that was the extent of a nightly hygiene routine. Now, about bathing, meaning immersion in a tub of water. Medieval people did bathe, just not as often as we do today, and not usually as part of a daily bedtime ritual. Bathing was considered a bit of a luxury in terms of resources, but records show it was far more common than the cliché of people never bathed. In fact, public bathhouses existed in many medieval towns and cities. By the 13th century, Paris had 32 public bathhouses in operation. Even smaller towns often had a communal bathhouse, sometimes conveniently located next to the bakery, so it could utilize the bakery oven's heat to warm the bathwater. People would go to these bathhouses perhaps weekly or a few times a month, not necessarily daily, but regularly when possible. For instance, an Englishman in the 1200s remarked how the visiting Vikings were oddly concerned with cleanliness because they bathed every week, which the English found noteworthy. So a weekly bath was seen as frequent in some circles. Imagine one of these medieval bathhouses during the daytime, a steamy room with large wooden tubs filled with hot water. It was a social and even festive atmosphere. Men and women often bathed separately, but there were mixed-sex establishments too. People might bathe nude or wrapped in sheets, reclining in the tubs with a cup of wine or even a meal. There are delightful and a bit scandalous accounts of bath feasts in 15th century Germany, where couples would sit in tubs eating and drinking, sometimes several people to a tub, essentially turning bath time into a party. Needless to say, the church frowned on co-ed, bathing due to potential immorality, and indeed some bathhouses doubled as fronts for brothels. For example, the famous Stews of Southwark in London. However, these were public or commercial settings. For a medieval person, a bath was often taken in the daytime or early evening as a separate activity, not necessarily right before sleep as we might shower. It required preparation, heating lots of water, filling a tub. If done at home, servants had to haul bucket after bucket of hot water to fill a freestanding wooden tub for their lord or lady. If a rich noble wanted a bath, it was an event. John Russell's 15th century Book of Nurture gives elaborate instructions to servants on how to prepare a lord's bath. Hang sheets or curtains around for privacy, and to keep the heat in, strew the floor, and even the tub with flowers and sweet herbs. Provide sponges or cushions for the lord to sit on in the tub, and gently wash him with soft sponges and scented water. They even mention warming the bath with boiled herbs like chamomile and mallow to soothe aches. After the bath, the lord would be rinsed with clean warm water, rose water, as suggested, for fragrance, and dried carefully. This sounds quite luxurious and relaxing. One can imagine the lord easing into a tented tub, steam rising as attendants pour water over his shoulders. Such a bath might well be followed by a very restful sleep. But it wasn't a daily occurrence, more like a special treat. King John of England, in the early 13th century, travelled with his own bathtub and a personal bath servant named William, indicating that he bathed on the go but needed assistance. King Edward III, in 1351, even installed taps for hot and cold water, flowing directly to his bathtub. At Westminster, a very early example of plumbing for a privileged few. And Charlemagne, centuries earlier, was said to love bathing so much he'd invite friends and family to join him in the large public baths of Aachen. For the common folk, if not using a public bathhouse, bathing might mean a dip in the river or pond in the summertime. In warm months, children likely splashed in streams, and adults too could submerge to get clean when weather allowed. But in cold seasons, a full body bath at home required effort. Perhaps a family might haul a wash tub into the kitchen, heat some water, and the members would take turns, often the younger or the father first in relatively cleaner water, and others after, with the water cooling and getting dirtier. There was a saying that the man of the house bathed first, then the sons, then the women, then the servants. By the end, the water was so murky you could lose an ox in it, hence the phrase, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," since the baby was supposedly last and the water opaque by then. While this saying is more proverbial than documented routine, it illustrates how reusing bathwater was common due to the labour involved in preparing it. As night approached, we can surmise that medieval people did at least some hygienic tasks as part of winding down. They might wash their feet if they were muddy. Clean feet not only felt better in bed, but also was polite if you shared bedding. A 15th century courtesy poem even advises wiping one's feet before getting into bed, likely to avoid dirtying the sheets or straw. They might also comb their hair or beard, not just for vanity, but because regular combing helped remove lice and fleas. Combs have been found in many medieval archaeological sites, showing how important this grooming was. A few strokes with a comb by candlelight, and perhaps shaking out the hair or beard, could dislodge unwanted critters before sleeping, though certainly not eliminate them entirely. Women often kept their hair braided at night to avoid tangles and present a neat appearance by morning. One curious aspect of medieval cleanliness was the relative rarity of laundered clothing. People did not change outfits daily, and they often slept either nude or in the same undergarments they wore in the day. It was common to simply strip down to a linen shirt or shift, long chemise, and sleep in that. Washing clothes was laborious, so that linen shift might only be washed weekly or less. However, linen was valued because it was easier to wash and it breathed well. Wealthier individuals had sets of clean linen underclothes. They would change more frequently, even if the heavy outer garments were cleaned rarely. So at bedtime, taking off one's outer wool or leather garments and remaining in a linen shirt was a basic nod to comfort and cleanliness, letting the body breathe and keeping the bed a bit cleaner. Monks, for instance, often slept in their robes or a tunic, but some orders allowed a fresh undertunic for night, or required taking off the leather belt or knife. As one rule says, remove their knives lest they cut themselves in sleep. Even that small detail, removing a knife, hints at a bedtime routine of sorts in monasteries, which we'll cover more soon. What about teeth brushing or oral hygiene? Medieval people didn't have modern toothbrushes or toothpaste, but they did care about their teeth to an extent. They would sometimes rinse the mouth with water or wine, rub teeth with a cloth, chew herbs like mint or sage to freshen breath, and pick their teeth with quills or wooden toothpicks. A common recommendation was to rinse the mouth in the morning. Less is said about night. Some did scrub teeth using twig frays like a natural brush, dipped in salt or herbal powders. However, extensive dental care nightly was likely rare. By bedtime, if they had eaten supper earlier, they might simply swish a bit of water and call it a night. The idea of no late snacking because you can't brush your teeth wasn't known, though interestingly, there were cautions about night eating for other reasons, like it could cause nightmares or vapors, leading to incubus attacks, some physicians thought. The attitude toward bathing frequency changed over the medieval period. Early on, many people did bathe reasonably often. There's record of medieval knights enjoying baths, and even specific instructions like, don't bathe in the summer too much, from a health perspective. Physicians like Mino de Minery in the 14th century extolled the virtues of bathing for health, saying it cleans the pores and helps remove waste from the body. So educated opinion was that bathing was beneficial if done properly. Monasteries even had rules on bathing. Many allowed several baths per year for each monk, more if ill or elderly. It varied by order. There's the famous extreme of saints or ascetics bragging about not bathing as a sign of piety. For example, Street Fintan of Ireland, who reportedly bathed only once a year for spiritual discipline, but those were seen as holy exceptions, not the norm. By the end of the Middle Ages, late 15th century, public bathhouses started to decline in Europe, partly due to outbreaks of disease like syphilis and plague, which made people fear public bathing, and partly due to more moralizing attitudes. Erasmus in 1526 noted with nostalgia that a few decades earlier public baths were popular, but today there are none. The new plague has taught us to avoid them. So ironically, towards the Renaissance, Europeans became less inclined to bathe publicly, ushering in a period 17th, 18th centuries, with quite poor hygiene compared to the medieval times. But in our medieval time frame, we can safely imagine that our villagers and nobles weren't utterly filthy all the time. They cleaned themselves in small ways, often took full baths sometimes, and certainly appreciated feeling refreshed when they did. Before bed, some medieval folks might have even used fragrant herbs or perfumes to improve their comfort. It was common to hang sachets of lavender, rosemary, or other pleasant herbs in living quarters to mask odors. A person might rub their hands with aromatic herbs after washing, leaving a soothing scent as they drifted to sleep. If they had been at a smoky fire all day, this could be welcome. Wealthy persons had access to distilled floral waters or oils. Perhaps a lady dabbed a bit of rose water on her temples to relax. Rose and lavender have mild, calming effects, noted even then. However, despite these efforts, by modern standards, a medieval bedroom and person would smell quite earthy. The combination of infrequent bathing, indoor smoke, and lack of deodorant meant natural body odors were present. People didn't seem to mind as much because everyone was in the same boat, and the smells of daily life, smoke, animals, sweat, were simply familiar. At night, the prevailing smells might be the wood smoke from the hearth, the lingering aroma of dinner stew or ale, the faint, urine-like whiff from chamber pots tucked in corners. No indoor plumbing means they used pots at night to relieve themselves, which might be emptied in the morning, and the musk of unwashed wool clothing. A modern nose might twitch, but a medieval sleeper likely found these smells ordinary and not too disturbing. In fact, strongly perfumed or soap-scrubbed people could be considered odd or even suspicious. A medieval proverb said that taking too many baths could make you weak or feeble, and some worried that bathing opened the pores and could let disease in if done at the wrong times. They advised against bathing in summer heat, for example, and warned that bathing too long could cause fatness and feebleness. So moderation was key. In summary, bedtime hygiene in medieval times involved minimal washing hands, face, feet, occasional indulgence in baths for those who could, and using clean linens or herbs to maintain comfort. Many simply went to sleep in the clothes or undergarments they had worn, especially if they were poor and had no change of clothes handy. Bathing was a separate affair, a communal treat, or a therapeutic regimen, not a nightly routine, but its infrequency was offset by small daily practices and the acceptance of natural grime. A famous, perhaps apocryphal phrase said medieval people were often born and died without having bathed in between, but we now know that's an exaggeration. They did bathe sometimes and were aware of health benefits of cleanliness, even if their standard of clean was more casual than ours. Let's conclude this section with a calming vignette. Imagine a medieval noblewoman preparing for bed. In her private chamber, a maid has brought a basin of warm water, infused with petals of chamomile and rose. The lady dips a fine linen cloth in it and pats her face and neck, wiping away the day's dust. She loosens her long hair from its braids, and another servant gently combs it out by lamplight, perhaps applying a few drops of lavender oil, a scent believed to calm the mind. The lady slips into a clean linen nightshift that's cool against her skin, She might whisper a prayer while the maid quietly empties the wash basin out the window. The stone floor has a rug to keep bare feet warm. Once in bed, a bed that earlier in the evening was warmed with a pan of coals. She feels the smooth sheets and fur coverlets embrace her. A subtle fragrance of herbs lingers in the air from sachets tucked among the bed linens. Though she has not had a full bath tonight, she feels refreshed enough, with clean hands and face, and a sense of order in her small bedtime rituals. She closes her eyes, perhaps thinking of the next day's events, or offering thanks for the simple comfort of being clean and safe, and soon she is ready to slip into slumber, with the household clean enough. And at rest, we'll move in our next chapter from the personal sphere to the social. What were the rules and rituals that governed behavior in medieval castles, especially at meal times and in daily routines? We've glimpsed a bit of castle life already. Now we'll explore it more deeply in a calm, orderly fashion. For even in the grandeur of a castle, there was an etiquette that brought a kind of peace and predictability to each day. Let's step softly into the castle halls again. This time not to sleep on the floor, but to observe the gentle routines of medieval etiquette and daily life. Castle etiquette, dining practices, and daily rituals. The life of a medieval castle was like a grand theatre of rituals and rules. From the moment the lord and lady woke up, through the day's feasts and duties, until the time everyone retired at night, etiquette guided behavior. These customs weren't arbitrary. They helped maintain order, hierarchy, and even a bit of comfort in a communal living space. Described calmly, a day in a castle had a reassuring rhythm, almost like a well-choreographed dance. Let's stroll through such a day, noting the courteous practices and quiet routines that made up the fabric of castle life. Morning in the castle. At first light, or often earlier, a typical castle would stir. If the lord was devout, he might begin the day with prayers or attend a private mass at the castle chapel at dawn. Many nobles heard mass daily, which set a contemplative tone for the morning. Afterward, the household would have a simple breakfast, perhaps bread dipped in wine or ale, maybe some cheese. It wasn't a grand meal, more a quick bite to break the night's fast. Servants might bring a basin of water for the lord and lady to wash their hands and face upon rising. It was considered proper to start the day clean and refreshed. Clothing in the morning was also a small ritual. Nobles often had attendants help them dress, layer by layer, the fine garments, a fresh linen shirt, stockings, a tunic, surcoat, etc., were laced or buttoned. A well-trained squire or lady's maid laid out the day's attire and ensured everything was in order. This process was unhurried, giving time perhaps for the lord to discuss the day's schedule quietly with his steward, or for the lady to plan household tasks with her maid. Once dressed, the lord might hold a brief court or meeting in the hall to address issues among his tenants or give orders for the estate's management. Meanwhile, the castle's servants and staff were already busy, some tending the kitchen fires, some fetching water, some grooming horses in the stables. Each knew their role and performed it, often in near silence in the early morning hush. Dining practices and etiquette. The main meal of the day in a castle was typically around midday, often called dinner, while a lighter supper was in the evening. But since our chapter focuses on etiquette and daily ritual, let's paint the scene of a castle's dinner in the Great Hall. This is where courtesy and rules really came alive. As the meal was announced, perhaps by a steward ringing a bell or simply calling everyone, people would gather in the Great Hall and take their designated places. Seating was strictly by rank. The lord, lady, and high-ranking guests sat at the high table on a raised platform, S, at one end of the hall. Less important folk sat at long tables running perpendicular or down the hall, with the least important near the doors. Everyone knew where they belonged. There was comfort in that order. Before anyone touched food, hands were washed as a matter of course. A servant would walk around with a pitcher of water and a basin, and each diner held their hands over the basin while water was poured, then dried their hands on linen towels provided. Clean hands were vital because people ate mostly with their fingers and knives. A medieval saying went, "No one wants to eat with someone who's dirty or unmannerly." And indeed, courtesy books insisted on clean hands and trimmed nails at the table. This little washing ceremony also had an almost spiritual feel, cleansing before breaking bread, reminiscent of priestly hand-washing at Mass. The tables were set not with individual plates as today, but often with shared trenchers. These could be thick slices of stale bread or wooden boards that served as plates. Two people usually shared one trencher and one drinking cup. This sharing meant good manners were essential. One had to be considerate of one's partner in all things. For example, when taking a sip of ale or wine from the shared cup, you'd wipe the brim before passing it. To be polite, you'd also not gulp down more than your share. The salt cellar was communal too, and courtesy demanded that you never stick a greasy finger directly into the salt. Instead, you would use a clean knife tip to take a pinch. Double dipping bread into communal sauce was absolutely forbidden as a vice. In fact, one medieval etiquette writer stated firmly, "If you have already bitten a piece of bread, do not dip it in the common sauce again," a clear medieval precursor to our modern horror at double-dipping chips. When the food arrived, platters of roasted meats, stews, pies, diners would cut portions with personal knives and lay some onto their trencher. They ate with fingers and perhaps a spoon for broths and potages. The rules guided them: take small bites, chew quietly, and do not speak with your mouth full. Do not blow on your food or drink to cool it, was another rule, lest you appear impatient or risk spitting it out. Napkins or tablecloths were provided for wiping fingers, and it was considered very rude to wipe your mouth or nose on your sleeve or the tablecloth. Instead, one used the napkin. In fact, both the Urbanus Magnus and Boke of Courtesier, two medieval guides, admonish not to sully the tablecloth with mess, since linens could be laundered but clothing was not as easily cleaned. If one needed to cough or sneeze, ideally they'd turn away or cover with a handkerchief, or at least their hand. Burping loudly, or worse, passing gas at table, while perhaps inevitable at times, was definitely frowned upon. Many courtesy books make humorous mention that one should leave the hall for such necessities if possible. The serving of food had its own gentle rituals. Dishes were often brought out in courses, and a carver might cut the Lord's meat in a refined way, presenting choice morsels. It was polite for dining partners to offer each other the best pieces from a dish. Medieval texts often advise something like, "Be generous with your table mate. Give them the better share." This fostered a spirit of hospitality and prevented quarrels. People were expected to eat with dignity, if not reverence, as one historian puts it. For instance, one should sit up straight, not sprawl, or put elbows on the table. Sound familiar to modern parents' admonitions? Daniel of Beccles, an early writer on manners, even allowed that you might put elbows on your own table at home, but certainly not as a guest elsewhere. During the meal, conversation was usually polite and subdued, especially if the lord or high guest was speaking. Loud or boisterous chatter would be inappropriate in front of superiors. Often there was entertainment during feasts, minstrels playing soft music or a singer telling a chivalric tale, and it was courteous to listen quietly. One did not want to appear uncouth by ignoring a performer or, worse, talking over them. When a course was finished, one might clean one's spoon on a piece of bread rather than licking it or wiping it on cloth. Bones or refuse were often placed on the trencher or possibly just dropped to the floor for dogs, though refined manners discouraged making a big mess even if servants would sweep up later. There's a myth that medieval diners just tossed bones over their shoulder to dogs. In reality, a tidy eater was admired. Some sources say neat piles of discarded bones were made, or a servant with a bowl might collect them. Leaving a horrific mess implied gluttony or lack of self-control. In Le Ménagier de Paris, à 14th C, Guide for the Author's Young Wife, it specifically says not to behave like a pig at table and to chew with your mouth closed, etc., echoing the universal truths of table manners. After the meal, hand washing might be offered again because eating with fingers left them greasy. The company might then enjoy a brief repose, perhaps listening to a lute or engaging in quiet conversation. It was custom in many great houses to then thank the host and say grace, a prayer of thanks at the end, as well as the beginning of a meal. With the biggest meal done, the castle's daily business continued. The lord might go to hunt in the afternoon or hold meetings. The lady might supervise the weaving of textiles or the training of younger maidens in household arts. Throughout the day, certain rituals of etiquette persisted. When addressing the lord or lady, servants bowed or curtsied. One did not speak to a superior without being spoken to first. Generally, if the lord was passing by, a servant would step aside, head slightly bowed. In turn, a good lord was expected to show courtesy downward as well, being kind in words, not striking servants in anger, though some did, of course, and showing the graceful nobility that was the ideal. In a castle, you'd also see daily rituals like the ringing of the chapel bell for prayers. If a chaplain was present, maybe at noon for the Angelus, or in the evening for Vespers, many castles had a rhythm of prayer, similar to monasteries, albeit fewer times a day. These moments added structure. People would pause, maybe cross themselves, or say a quick prayer when they heard the bell, then continue about their tasks in a more serene frame of mind. Evening in the castle. As dusk approached, activities wound down. Supper was a lighter meal, taken perhaps at sundown. There was etiquette here too, but often it was a more casual affair than the main dinner. After supper, entertainment or relaxation time came. In a gentle, meditative description, imagine the great hall after dinner with a mellow atmosphere. Perhaps a storyteller or bard recites a romance by the fire. The lord's family and guests sit in chairs or on cushions, sipping spiced wine or ale. Children might play at the edges of the hall. Servants quietly clear the tables, and then might join in listening to the story from the sidelines. This was a communal wind-down routine. In winter, they might bring out chess sets or other board games for some friendly competition. The glow of torches and the large fireplace would cast a golden light. Etiquette extended even to these entertainments. One should not cheat at games considered very dishonorable, and should be a gracious winner or loser. A noble was taught to carry themselves with equanimity, no shouting in triumph or sulking in defeat. Laughter and mirth, however, were welcomed in the appropriate measure. Some evenings might include dancing to the music of a few minstrels, courtly dances that everyone knew, providing gentle exercise and social bonding, bowing to one's partner, not stepping on toes, and keeping proper distance were all parts of the dance etiquette. Finally comes bedtime in the castle, which we described earlier in terms of sleeping arrangements. But there were also etiquette points at night. For instance, a lord might escort an honoured guest personally to their prepared chamber as a sign of respect, or the lady of the house might ensure a guest lady had everything she needed for the night: a basin of water, a fresh linen towel, perhaps a warming pan in the bed. Bidding good night was done with cordial words. Rest well, or God give you good rest. If a castle was following proper protocol, they'd even have someone stand guard near guest chambers to be available if a guest needed something in the night, or simply to ensure their safety. One fun tidbit: there was a castle custom in some places of the curfew drum or bell. Much like towns, castles might have a set time in the evening when a drumbeat or bell signaled that all servants should bank their fires, stop any noisy work, and quietly retire. This ensured silence in the castle at night and reduced fire hazards. Obeying the curfew was important. To disregard it would be a breach of discipline and etiquette. To appreciate how all these rules contributed to a peaceful environment, consider what a castle would be without them. Chaotic, possibly dangerous bones on the floor to trip over, knives brandished wildly, arguments flaring. But with etiquette, even a hall filled with rough knights could be tamed into polite society. Knights were trained in chivalry, which included respectful behavior at table and in ladies' presence. It was said that good manners distinguished a noble from a brute. So even after bloody battles, a knight was expected to clean up and be gentle at home. Perhaps a comforting thought. Let's close this chapter by visualizing a small nightly castle scene that reflects their daily rituals wrapping up. The high table is empty now, the dais cleared. A few last candles gutter as servants snuff them out one by one. The rushes on the floor have been straightened and fresh herbs added earlier in the day lend a faint, pleasant odour, maybe lavender or sweet woodruff, deterring insects and providing fragrance. The lord and lady have withdrawn to their private solar upstairs, where the lady's maid is unlacing the lady's gown, and the lord's squire helps him off with his boots. Down in the hall, those who will sleep there arrange their bedding quietly. One could hear, if close, a murmur of good night exchanged among friends, or a short prayer of a servant whispered as he lays down his head on a folded cloak. A gentle hush envelops the castle. The etiquette that governed their day now gives way to the democratic simplicity of sleep. High or low, all alike need rest and warmth. In that, they share a common routine as ancient as humanity. Having walked through the structured world of castle manners and customs, we will next tiptoe into a different realm of medieval routine, that of the cloister and monastery. If castles were governed by etiquette, monasteries were governed by strict rules and spiritual discipline. Yet, as we'll see, there is a deep tranquility in the monastic way of life, with its own sleep patterns and silences. Prepare to hear the echo of chants and the soft shuffle of sandaled feet as we visit a monastery's quiet precincts in the night. Monastic life, sleep, work, and silence in monasteries. Our journey now brings us to the serene world behind abbey walls, a medieval monastery at night. Here, life followed a disciplined cycle of prayer, work, and rest, known as the rule. Monks and nuns, in female convents, devoted their lives to spiritual practice, and their daily schedule, or horarium, was carefully structured from before dawn till after dusk. Yet even in this strict regimen, There is a gentle rhythm that can lull us with its predictability and devotion. The monastery, with its stone arches and candlelit chapels, is a place where silence is golden and sleep is part of a spiritual routine. Picture a Benedictine monastery, one of the most common orders in medieval Europe, nestled in a valley. The sun has set, and after a simple evening meal, the monks assembled in the chapel to sing Compline, the night prayer. Compline is very much a bedtime prayer service, meant to place oneself in God's care for the night. The monks chant the psalm, "In peace I will lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." They sing a hymn, perhaps Te lucis ante terminum, to thee before the close of day, we plead for help, O Lord, we pray. A beautiful ancient hymn asking God to ward off bad dreams and night fears. In the soft harmony of their voices, one can already sense the calm descending on the monastery. After Compline, in most monasteries, began the sacred great silence. From that point until the next morning, no unnecessary words were to be spoken. The monks filed out of the chapel in silence, candles in hand, and each went to the dormitory, their common sleeping quarters. In a typical abbey, the monks did not have private bedrooms. Instead, they slept communally in a long room, each in a small alcove or under a modest partition, or simply lined up with their beds separated by a bit of space. The beds might be simple wooden frames or cots, each with a straw mattress and blanket. A rule from the Rule of Street, Benedict, foundational guide for Benedictine monastic life, written in the 6th century, says, the monks should sleep in separate beds, apparently separate as opposed to sharing, emphasizing personal modesty. They were to sleep fully clothed in their robes or tunics, with a belt, but notably without their knives at their side, as we mentioned, to prevent accidents. A candle or lamp burned low in the dormitory, just enough that if one monk needed to rise, he could see by it. In this dormitory, silence reigned. One could likely hear only the rustling of straw as the brothers settled in, or the soft sound of someone saying a last private prayer. Perhaps one older monk coughs quietly in the dimness. The scent in the air is of wax, old wood, and the faint herbal smell from the monk's robes, which are made of undyed wool that has been stored with lavender or rosemary to deter moths, a common practice. Each monk lies on his back or side, hands folded or tucked in sleeves, eyes closed, entering sleep with a heart of prayer. The great silence means even whispered chatter with your neighbor is forbidden. This silence was cherished as a time to listen for God's voice internally and to maintain the peace of the night. Monks typically went to bed quite early by our standards. The Benedictine rule prescribed an early bedtime, around twilight or shortly after, depending on season, roughly 8 p.m. in winter, 9 p.m. in summer. This ensured they got enough rest because their night would be interrupted. And indeed, after a few hours of sleep in the dark dormitory, something happens. A bell tolls at midnight. This is the call to matins, also called vigils, the night office of prayer. At the first sound of the bell, the dormitory comes to life with quiet efficiency. The monks rise from their beds, likely a bit groggy, but trained by years of routine. They do not have to change clothes, since they slept in their habit, so they simply slip their feet into sandals. Perhaps they splash a bit of water on the face from a basin to wake up if needed, but in many cases they might forego that due to the chill. Each takes up a handheld oil lamp or candle. If it's very dark, some monasteries might have had a corridor lit enough to guide them. In complete silence, in the wee hours of the night, the line of hooded monks proceeds out of the dormitory, down the cloister walk, and into the cold stone church. Imagine this procession, a dozen or more figures in black or brown robes, hoods drawn up, candles in hand, gliding through the darkness like gentle phantoms. They assemble in the choir stalls of the church, each monk standing at his assigned spot. Then, when all are present, Matins begins. A single voice intones, Domine, labia mea apries, O Lord, open my lips, and the rest respond, Etos meum annuntiabit laudem tuam, and my mouth shall proclaim your praise. Thus the silence is broken not by idle talk but by prayerful chant. In that vast chapel, in the dead of night, their voices echo and intertwine, reciting psalms that have been chanted at these hours for centuries. They sing perhaps Psalm 130, Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord, quite fitting for the midnight hour. The candles on the altar and a few along the choir provide just enough light to read the Psalter books. The faces of the monks remain mostly in shadow under their hoods, each illumined by the soft glow of their own candle. This vigil can last a good while. Matins was the longest office, especially on feast days, with additional readings and psalms. It might go on for an hour or more, followed seamlessly by lauds, the dawn prayer, around 3 a.m., or they might have a short break between the two. During matins, some younger monks may struggle against drowsiness. The rule actually acknowledges this. If a monk nods off, he might be discreetly nudged by the brother next to him, or if habitually sleeping, he might receive a mild penance later. But mostly, the chanting itself keeps them awake. It's not a loud or passionate singing, but a steady, melodic recitation that requires attention. The effect on a listener, say, if we were invisible observers in that dark chapel, would be hypnotic and soothing. The Latin words flowing in plainsong, the repetition of prayers, would almost lull one into a contemplative trance. The monks themselves aim for that. Prayerful wakefulness, a state between sleep and alertness, as they keep watch in the night as a service to God and even symbolically to the world. There was an idea that monks praying at night were spiritual watchmen, guarding against evil while others slept. After matins and lauds, which is often combined or follows shortly, the monks return to their dormitory. Now it might be roughly 3:30 or 4, 0 inches the morning. In summer, the first glow of dawn could be nearing. In winter, it's still pitch black. They silently slip back into their beds. The great silence is technically broken after matins, but many orders still kept silence until later to maintain the peaceful atmosphere. The monks will catch another short period of sleep. This is essentially their second sleep as well, like the segmented pattern we described. Street. Benedict's rule actually ensured monks got adequate sleep by adjusting the number of nocturnal psalms by season, so that winter nights, longer, allowed enough rest, and summer short nights still gave some sleep by having fewer readings. In total, it's thought monks got around 6 to 8 hours of sleep in segments. Some modern calculations of the rule show about 7.5 hours allotted in winter, maybe a bit less in summer. Interestingly, Benedict specifically mentions that if a monk finds the nights short, he can meditate or read quietly in the time others might still be resting, implying not all sleep needs are identical, but everyone remains in a restful state. As dawn truly breaks, the monastery wakes again. The bell rings for prime early morning prayer around 6 a.m. The monks arise, this time from their second sleep, and head to church again. The night's deep silence transitions into daytime's relative liveliness. After prime, they might finally speak briefly. Perhaps the chapter meeting happens, where daily work assignments are given and any community issues addressed. Speaking is done quietly and with respect. No idle chatter still. Monastic culture often values speaking only what is necessary or edifying. Monastic daily work then begins. Some monks go to the gardens to tend vegetables and herbs, some to the library to copy manuscripts, others to the kitchen to bake bread, others to greet and assist any poor or travelers at the guest house. Hospitality was a key duty. The tasks are usually done in silence or with minimal talk. Often one monk reads aloud from a holy book while others work, so their minds stay on God even during labor. This blend of silence and scripture made their work feel prayerful. You can imagine a monk pulling weeds in the herb garden, the morning sun on his face, while he recites psalms under his breath, or listens to a distant reading voice from a window, a peaceful, meditative scene. At set hours mid-morning and noon, the bell rings for terce and sex prayers, which the monks pause their work to attend. Then, midday meal, the main meal, often around noon. Similar courtesy to secular dining, but in silence while a monk reads to them. A short rest. Some monasteries allowed a brief nap or siesta after lunch, especially in summer, a practical measure in the heat. Then more work in the afternoon, then none afternoon prayer, around 3 p.m., then later vespers, evening prayer at sunset, then supper and compline again. This cycle repeats each day. The constancy of it is itself calming. The monks know what each hour brings, and the predictability is like a heartbeat of the monastery. Now, let's focus specifically on how monastic sleep and silence were considered spiritually meaningful. Monks saw sleep as a necessary part of life, but also something to discipline. Too much sleep was viewed as laziness or a gateway to temptation. The saying, "idle hands are the devil's workshop," could extend to lying in bed too long. So, they limited sleep to just what was needed. Benedict even wrote that monks should be granted the amount of sleep they need, and no more, which he roughly thought to be about 8 hours in winter, when nights were long, and a bit less in summer. They would rise at night because being always comfortable was not the goal. A bit of sacrifice, waking in the cold, praying when tired was offered to God. However, he was not cruel. He explicitly says if someone is ill, they can rest more or have meat, etc. Moderation in all things. The great silence after compline was also partly practical, ensuring quiet so all can sleep, and partly spiritual. The idea of ending the day in contemplation and not idle talk. Breaking the great silence without urgent need was a serious fault in many orders. So monks perfected ways to communicate small necessary things by gestures at night, a kind of silent language if, say, one needed to indicate, "I'm going to the latrine," or "I need help." Think of it as an early form of sign language for essential communication without words. In nunneries, similar patterns held. Nuns would also rise at night for matins and maintain silence. A gentle image from a convent. Sisters in white habits, walking softly in stockinged feet down a corridor lined with tapestries to muffle echoes, each carrying a small lantern, assembling to sing angelic harmonies in the midnight chapel. Perhaps a young novice struggles to keep her eyes open, but an older kindly nun catches her eye and smiles encouragingly, and they continue chanting. After prayers, maybe one sister stays a moment in the chapel, kneeling alone after others leave, pouring out her heart in a whisper to the Virgin Mary's statue, the glow of a single candle illuminating her tranquil face. Then she too returns to bed. monastic secrets or lesser-known facts. Monks sometimes used interesting tricks to stay awake or get up. Some would sleep in a sitting position or with a thin rope across their chest that would jostle them if they slumped too much. But this was more of an extreme ascetic practice, not typical in all houses. Most probably just relied on the bell and obedience to get up, plus the collective habit. Also, not all monks found it easy. There are accounts in monastic writings admonishing against falling back to sleep or skipping matins. But peer pressure in a dorm made it likely all would follow the routine. Despite the hardships, cold nights, limited sleep, many monks wrote that the night vigils were among their most cherished times. The quiet of those hours and the sense of unity with God under the stars gave them deep spiritual joy. A 12th century monk, Guibert of Nogent, described how sometimes the chanting at night was so fervent it felt like the dark church was filled with angels singing along. One can imagine the comfort it might bring to a troubled soul to be singing praise at midnight, feeling at peace, while the rest of the world's turbulence pauses. From a sensory perspective, think of a monastery's night, the cool stone under bare feet, as monks pad to prayer, the smell of melting beeswax from candles, the distant hoot of an owl outside, the echo of chant in cloisters, the later comfort of sliding back into a plain but sufficient bed, and above all, a profound silence surrounding these sounds, like a protective cocoon. If you or I were guests at a medieval monastery, some monasteries did house travelers in separate quarters. We might initially find their schedule daunting, but maybe, after adjusting, we'd discover a special tranquility in living by the sun, moon, and bell. Early to bed, a pause to contemplate at midnight, early to rise. It is not unlike certain modern mindfulness or spiritual retreats, which seek to remove the chaos of daily life and replace it with ritual and quiet. As we conclude our glimpse of monastic nightly life, we can carry forth a bit of their ethos of silence and reflection. The monks teach us that night can be not only for rest, but also for prayer and introspection. In the medieval worldview, their prayers at night were like a beacon of hope and sanctity shining in the darkness. The idea that while villagers and lords slept, monks kept an eye on the spiritual well-being of the world can be oddly comforting. Someone was awake, tending to the divine, ensuring that morning would indeed come. Now, as dawn comes once more to our narrative, we shall leave the cloister and step back out among ordinary folk, specifically the peasants working in the fields and living by the turning of seasons. In our next chapter, we'll explore how the rhythm of nature, summer and winter, planting and harvest, influenced the sleep and life patterns of medieval peasants. Their lives were different from monks, yet they too had their cycles of labor and rest dictated by sun and season. Let us bid a silent farewell to the monastery with a final image: the morning sunlight filtering through stained glass in the abbey church, touching the weary but peaceful faces of monks who have labored in prayer through the night, now ready to begin a new day of humble work. And with that gentle benediction, we continue on our journey. Life of peasants and seasonal rhythms. Leaving the hushed cloisters, we return to the wide world under the open sky, the world of medieval peasants who made up the vast majority of the population. These are the farmers, villagers, and laborers who lived close to the land, whose daily and nightly routines were deeply intertwined with nature's cycles. For them, the changing seasons brought dramatic shifts in workload, daylight, and even sleep patterns. By understanding their year, we can find a slow, repetitive rhythm that, though filled with hardship, also had its own ebb and flow of rest. Spring, planting season. As winter's chill faded, peasants grew busy with preparation and planting. The dawn chorus of birds often served as their alarm clock in spring, earlier and earlier as the days lengthened. A peasant family would wake at first light, or soon after, no wasting good daylight. The morning might start with a quick bite of coarse bread, maybe dipped in ale, which was safer to drink than water. Then out to Lork, to the fields. Sleep during spring might still be on the longer side if nights were cool and dark, but as spring progressed, their sleep shortened naturally since more work needed doing and the dawn came earlier. Picture a ploughman following his oxen, turning the soil under a pale spring sun. It's hard work, but the air is fresh and full of the scent of thawing earth and new grass. By midday, he is sweating. He pauses when the church bell rings noon. Yes, even villages had bells, or someone who blew a horn, and thanks God for the half-day's work. Many medieval accounts suggest that peasants did take a break at noon for food and often a rest, possibly even a little nap in the shade if time allowed. This was pragmatic. Avoid the strongest sun, digest the meal, and restore some energy. A 16th century bishop's complaint, not medieval but illustrating older habits, said labourers must have their breakfast, and at noon their sleeping time, then their afternoon drink, which spends a great part of the day. So indeed, a short midday sleep, a nooning, was customary during intense labour seasons. We can imagine our ploughman, after eating some pottage, vegetable stew and bread, reclining against a haystack hat over eyes, snatching 15 to 30 minutes of snooze while the oxen munch contentedly nearby. This nap was considered one of the rights of labourers in pre-industrial times, a traditional entitlement. After the brief rest, back to the fields till evening. Come sunset, peasants were exhausted. In springtime, that might be around 6 or 7 p.m, when light waned, later towards summer, they'd head home to their cottage. There, a simple supper of perhaps peas, onions and bread awaited, maybe with a little salted herring or smoked pork fat if available. Then typically straight to bed soon after dusk, because tomorrow will be another early day. They wouldn't burn much lamp oil or candles, too precious. So once darkness covered the village, most people simply slept. The seasonal rhythm is noticeable here. In spring, work intensity rises. Sleep might shrink a bit because nights are shorter and tasks pressing, but still, nature grants spring moderate nights and not the extreme of summer yet. Summer, growing, and harvest. Now the year reaches the long days and short nights. In a medieval June or July, the sun might set around 9 p.m. and rise as early as 4 a.m. in Northern Europe. That's only 7 hours of true dark. Did peasants sleep less in summer? Possibly yes, out of necessity. Fields and gardens demanded attention. Weeding, haymaking, repairs, plus any harvests that came early like hay in June. A famous medieval phrase describes summer work. From dawn to dusk, 16 hours in summer and 8 in winter. Indeed, one scholar noted, a typical medieval workday went from dawn to dusk, but with breaks for meals and a nap, resulting in maybe 8 to 10 actual hours of labour on average. A summer day for peasants likely included rising very early. Some sources say as early as 3 to 4 a.m. during peak times. They do heavy work in the cooler morning hours. By midday, The heat was strong. The noon break was especially cherished in summer. Many would seek shade, perhaps even by a stream, take a dip to cool off, or just wash the sweat off their face and arms. Then, they definitely might nap if possible. The concept of siesta is not just Mediterranean. Even English and French medieval sources mention afternoon rest in warm weather. The Bishop of Durham's complaint, from 1570, basically outlines that after lunch, the labourer takes his bever, a drink or snack, and a nap, spending a great part of the day resting before resuming work. So we see that midday sleep was embedded in the routine, at least enough to be commented on. After that, work continued into early evening. In high summer, light lingered, so they might work later than usual, but often they'd stop a bit before sunset to avoid the day's hottest part. In mid-afternoon, and then possibly do another short stint when it cooled down. By twilight, though, everyone was thoroughly tired. They might enjoy the slightly cooler evening air, perhaps sitting outside their cottage door for a short while, exchanging a few words with neighbours about the day. Children might play or chase fireflies, but soon, as darkness deepened, they turned in. The family once again shares the communal bed or sleeping space, grateful for rest. Summer nights being hot, they might leave the door cracked or sleep near an open window, if they had one, often just a shutter. In some places, people even slept outdoors on especially stifling nights, maybe in the barn, on fresh hay where it was breezier, or on the cottage threshold, though this could be risky insect bites, or even supernatural fears like wandering spirits. But in dire heat, comfort wins. During summer, segmented sleep probably still occurred, but one wonders, if you only have to 7 hours of dark and you've been labouring so hard, might you just sleep right through? Possibly. Many peasants were tired enough to conk out fully until dawn, with minimal waking. However, because habit and environment predisposed segmented sleep, they may have still woken after a first sleep naturally, especially if they went to bed early, say 9 to 10 p.m. They might wake at midnight or 1 a.m., then doze again. If they woke, they might step outside to feel the night breeze or check on animals. Maybe some would even water the garden in the cool of night, a quiet chore that could be done by moonlight. The world at night in summer would be alive with crickets, frogs, and the rustle of leaves. A peasant awake in that tranquil hour might reflect on the need for rain, or perhaps say a prayer for a good harvest while gazing at the stars. Then they'd return to their straw pallet to get the remaining few hours of sleep until the cock's crow signals another day. Autumn, harvest and preparations. Late summer and early autumn were the grand finale of the agricultural year. The grain harvest, followed by preparations for winter. This was arguably the most strenuous time. Historical accounts often cite how during harvest, all hands were in the fields from dawn till dusk. Feasts like the harvest home were celebrated after the last sheaf was in, but until then, people pushed themselves. Sleep could be scarce on specific days. For example, if weather threatened rain, they might work later than usual to bring in hay or sheaves before a storm. There are anecdotes of villagers working by moonlight to finish the harvest in emergencies. Generally, though, by autumn the days start shortening. The extreme heat passes, making work more bearable, and midday naps perhaps shorter or unnecessary on cooler days. A peasant's daily schedule in September might shift with earlier dusk. They might finish field work by say 7 p.m. as nights grow longer, giving a bit more evening leisure. Harvest time also came, with communal work. families helping each other, maybe singing in the fields to keep morale. The evening after a good harvest day could be a bit festive, sharing some extra ale, telling stories of the day's events, then turning in deeply tired but content. They likely slept heavily after such exertion, and once the main harvest was in, there might even be a slight season of comparative rest. A saying was that medieval peasants had more holidays and downtime after harvest and over winter when field work was minimal. In fact, medieval calendars were filled with saints' days and church feasts where work was reduced. By some counts, peasants might not work over a third of the days in a year due to Sundays and holidays. These breaks were unevenly distributed through the year, with many in the winter. Around Christmas, the 12 days of Christmas often had feasting and minimal work. Winter, rest and handicrafts. Now, the quiet season comes. Days are shortest. In deep winter, sunrise might be 8 a.m. and sunset 4 p.m. in England, for example. Crops lie dormant. There is little to do in the fields except maybe tend animals, thresh stored grain indoors, and make needed repairs or crafts. Winter for peasants meant long nights by the fire. With darkness enveloping the world by late afternoon, families retreated inside. They often gathered around the hearth, the source of heat and light. Here is where oral culture flourished. Winter evenings were for storytelling, reciting ballads, or just chatting and mending tools or clothing by firelight. Since we are focusing on sleep, in winter, medieval people likely experienced the fullest expression of segmented sleep because nights were very long, up to 14 to 16 hours of darkness in higher latitudes. They certainly didn't sleep the whole time. Instead, they probably enjoyed that first sleep, then a waking period where perhaps they stoked the fire, used the time to tell a quiet tale or two, maybe even visit neighbors briefly if the weather was fine and houses close. Some might pop over to share spiced ale. A 14th century account by historian Jacques Le Goff suggests that on cold winter nights, peasants might get up and warm themselves at the hearth, and even do tasks like repairing harness or weaving baskets in the middle of the night before going back to a second sleep. The abundant opportunity for sleep in winter was noted. One 19th century scholar estimated medieval peasants might sleep 11 to 12 hours in winter thanks to the long nights, though that likely includes those wakeful interludes. Also, winter was when they recovered from the intense labor of summer. Church records show fewer work days. This doesn't mean they lounged idly. They still had chores, chopping wood, caring for livestock, which could be laborious, lugging water to cows in the barn, etc., spinning wool, brewing beer, and going to town markets or fairs, if any. But they had more flexibility to sleep in after sunrise if nothing urgent pressed. If snow fell and fields were inaccessible, well, it became a de facto holiday. During harsh winter weather, the whole family might even go to bed earlier just to stay warm under covers. Piling together, even with a goat or dog for extra warmth, they would conserve heat. Mornings were difficult, crawling out of warm straw into a freezing room. A saying was to stay in bed while it's still dark in winter. Indeed, Benedict's rule adjusted night prayers to allow monks more sleep in winter because the nights were so long. Similarly, peasants probably allowed themselves a bit of indulgence of staying under furs longer. Medieval people also believed that certain times of year affected health and energy. Winter was a time to eat heavier foods, rest more, whereas summer required lighter fare and more water. They might have used winter nights to think of the supernatural too, telling ghost stories or worrying about witches as winter nights around Yule were seen as eerie times. But in a comforting sense, families likely bonded in these quiet times. Perhaps a grandmother lulled the children with a slow tale by flickering firelight, while mother mended a shirt and father carved a new wooden spoon, all within that one-room hut's glow. When embers died down, they'd all retire, sleeping deeply until maybe midnight. Then one adult wakes to add a log to the fire and check that the cow in the corner is okay. Then back to sleep until the late winter dawn. Interestingly, one account by an English medieval writer, Bartholomew the Englishman, described winter as a time of binding and freezing, and that all things which flourished in summer die in winter. It was symbolically linked to old age and death. But for living through it, peasants adapted. They also celebrated many winter feasts. Christmas, 12 days of celebration. And then Plough Monday after Epiphany, when work resumed. Carnival, just before Lent, in the February, with merriment. These events broke up the monotony of winter and often involved staying up later than usual to enjoy dances or ales, ironically making up for the long nights by not sleeping early on feast nights. One more seasonal aspect: work intensity and labor hours. Modern research by scholars like Juliet Shaw indicates that medieval peasants might have actually worked fewer hours annually than modern people. They had intense periods, like harvest, but also lots of saints' days off and slack times in winter. So in slack periods, they likely got plenty of rest. Chronic fatigue would come in harvest times, but then winter compensated. So, summarizing the peasant seasonal sleep pattern: winter, long nights, equals abundant sleep, maybe to 10-12 hours in 2 segments. Midday nap, not needed due to short day length, but often not much heavy work anyway. Spring, moderate nights, increasing work. Sleep slightly shorter, maybe still segmented. Midday breaks commence as days get longer. Summer, short nights, heavy work. Likely segmented sleep, but total maybe less, perhaps 6 to 7 hours broken up, plus a midday nap of 30 to 60 minutes to supplement. Many were exhausted enough to sleep deeply when they could, possibly some sleep deprivation during critical harvest days, but then recovery sleep right after. Autumn, nights lengthen again, work intense, then taper. Sleep time starts to increase after harvest, with celebration and rest. Year-round, observing Sabbath every Sunday. No work, thus more rest. Probably sleeping in a bit and leisure in afternoon. Frequent church feast days, maybe around 50 to 80 per year depending on region, where either whole day or half day off work. Likely those mornings could be spent in church and then modest feasting, perhaps with a nap after feasting, as heavy food and ale encourage a doze. So they weren't strangers to taking it easy on certain days. Imagine one particular day, Candlemas Day, Feb 2, an important winter feast. The peasants attend church in the morning, get candles blessed. There's no fieldwork scheduled. They have a hearty midday meal, maybe pancakes or special bread. By the hearth, that cold afternoon, with a full belly and nothing urgent, father nods off in his chair. Mother dozes while carding wool. Children curl up with the dog. It's a communal little winter nap, the luxury of a holiday. They wake before dusk, light the newly blessed candle as a symbol of returning light. Candlemas was seen as winter's midpoint. Perhaps sing a hymn, then have a light supper. That night, they might actually not wake much at midnight because they had such a relaxed day and their sleep is sound. The seasonal rhythm also meant psychological changes. Winter might induce melancholy or introspection. Summer, though hard, was joyful, with life buzzing and bright evenings where they might sing while working. Autumn brought relief and thankfulness at harvest's end. Spring, hope, and planning for the year ahead. Their sleep and dreams probably reflected these moods. In winter's long nights, more dreams might be remembered. Some may be ominous, as medieval folks often imbued winter with supernatural elements. In summer, one might be too tired to recall dreams, sleeping like a log until that cursed rooster crowed at 4 a.m. Throughout, nature's sounds were their lullabies. Crickets in summer, gentle rain on thatch roofs in autumn, howling winds in winter, with snow muffling the world. Frogs and nightingales in spring. These would be familiar and even comforting, except maybe wolves howling or dogs barking at intruders, which might alarm them. In all, a peasant's life oscillated between intense labor and periods of rest. Modern people might envy the winter downtime and frequent holidays, though not the physical hardship. One medieval saying was that Adam delved and Eve span, meaning labor is humanity's lot since Eden, but also that there's a natural balance. Adam digs, spring, summer, Eve spins, winter, indoor work. Each has its season. As we cozy up to the idea of a winter peasant night, wind outside, family huddled by the fire telling tales, we can almost feel the kinship with them. In those moments, humans across time share the same desire for warmth, rest, and a bit of storytelling before bed. With the seasonal cycle covered, we shall next explore something that floated through medieval nights regardless of season: dreams and beliefs about what lurked in the dark. Medieval peasants, like all people, dreamed and wondered what those dreams meant. They also held fears of spirits or night walkers that might trouble their sleep. In our next chapter, we'll quietly delve into the world of medieval dreams and the night's unseen presences. But fear not, we will handle these spooky themes gently, as one might soothe a child who's afraid of the dark, reminding them that a prayer or a candle's light can chase the monsters away. So stoke the fire a little, and let's listen to the whispers of medieval dreams and folklore as we continue this journey. Medieval dreams and beliefs about sleep and night spirits. In the hush of the medieval night, when the fires burned low and shadows danced on cottage walls, minds could wander into mysterious realms. Dreams, those involuntary stories that come in sleep, were often a source of fascination and sometimes dread. Medieval people generally believed that dreams could carry messages, perhaps from God, perhaps from the devil, or from some ethereal part of one's own soul. Night itself was seen as a liminal time when spirits might roam. Yet, as we discuss these beliefs, we will do so softly and reassuringly, much as a kindly storyteller might share fairy tales by the hearth to make sense of the darkness rather than to frighten. Dreams in medieval thought. The scholarly and religious interpretation of dreams in the Middle Ages was largely inherited from earlier sources like the Bible and classical writings. For example, Macrobius, a Roman writer, classified dreams into categories like oracular, prophetic, etc. It was accepted that certain dreams could be divine revelations. Think of the biblical Joseph's dreams predicting famine, or the many saints who dreamed of angelic guidance. On the other hand, some dreams were seen as trivial nonsense, just the result of indigestion or vapors in the body. Medieval medicine held that what you ate could influence dreams. And then there were the troubling dreams, like nightmares, which many believed might be the work of demons or malicious spirits, exploiting the sleeper's vulnerability. Picture a medieval peasant man, after a hard day's work, falling into a deep slumber on his straw bed. In the middle of the night, he starts to stir, face contorting in distress. He's dreaming that a dark creature sits on his chest, pressing the breath out of him. He tries to shout, but in the dream no sound comes. He awakes with a jolt, heart pounding, feeling as if something was just in the room. This is a classic nightmare experience, and indeed, the word nightmare originates from exactly such a concept. Mare was an Old English term for a demonic being or goblin that would ride a sleeper, giving them bad dreams. Medieval people across Europe had similar terms. In German Alp or Mar, in Scandinavian folklore a Mara, all describing a female, usually spirit that attacks at night by sitting on a person, causing terrifying dreams and a sensation of suffocation. What we today recognize as sleep paralysis with hallucinations was then often explained as an actual demon or witch's spell. There are recorded charms and prayers to ward off the night hag or nightmare. For example, an old folk prayer from the British Isles goes, "Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, bless the bed that I lie on. 4 corners to my bed, 4 angels round my head. From any evil, deliver me." Such charms illustrate the desire for protection in the vulnerable state of sleep. Night spirits and superstitions. Beyond nightmares, medieval lore was rich with other nocturnal beings. People in the Middle Ages did believe the night could be populated by wandering souls or maleficent creatures. The wild hunt. In Germanic folklore, a spectral horde of huntsmen with horses and hounds was said to fly through the sky on stormy nights. To hear them pass was an ill omen. But snug in bed, a child might be warned. Stay inside, or the wild hunt might sweep you away. Told in a gentle tone, it was perhaps as much to keep children from wandering out at night as a genuine belief. Werewolves and witches. While more of an early modern craze, there were medieval whispers that certain nights, like full moons or seasonal changes, could cause shapeshifters to roam. Peasants might light extra candles or keep a sacred object by the bedside for peace of mind. Garlic or iron under the pillow were thought in some regions to ward off evil. For example, some believed an iron knife under the bed could keep witches or fae at bay, iron being thought to repel spirits. Revenants, tales of the unquiet dead, ghosts, or even corporeal undead, surface in medieval chronicles. But these were not common everyday fears. More often, the average person might just murmur a prayer for any departed relatives before sleep, in case their souls wandered. The church taught praying for souls in purgatory was good, so if a grandmother appeared in a dream, one might interpret it as her soul asking for prayers. However, not all night beings were evil. There were also guardians of night in belief. The idea of a personal guardian angel was very present. People would pray, "Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom his love commits me here, ever this night be at my side," as a bedtime invocation. This gave comfort that while they sleep, a benign spirit watches over them. Saintly visions. Many saints' lives record visions at night. A monk might dream of a saint telling him some wisdom, or a peasant woman might dream that the Virgin Mary came to her, bringing healing or comfort. Such dreams were not feared but treasured. If someone had a beautiful, glowing dream, they might recount it to their priest or family and wonder if it was a small miracle. Interpreting dreams. For those puzzling over dreams, there were in fact medieval dream manuals. One example, the Somniale Danielis, Dream Book of Daniel, circulated, claiming to date back to the biblical Daniel's wisdom, which gave interpretations for dream symbols. For instance, to dream of green trees might mean good things, but to dream of falling could mean a coming misfortune, etc. While educated clergy often frowned on trying to divine the future via dreams, seeing it as borderline pagan, common folks probably kept little heuristic meanings alive. A mother might tell her daughter, "If you dream of a wedding, it means a funeral, for dreams go by opposites." Or, "If you dream of teeth falling out, it's a sign of death in the family." These are examples of later folklore that likely have older roots. We must mention one very famous medieval dream belief: the concept of incubus for women and succubus for men, demons that were thought to prey sexually on sleepers, causing things like erotic dreams or nocturnal emissions. Medieval scholars wrote seriously about incubi and succubi. It ties into the nightmare scenario, as often people experiencing sleep paralysis with a sexual component might say a succubus, female demon, visited them. This sounds scary, but how did they cope? The remedy was usually prayer or invoking holy names. In a gentle narrative, we can imagine a monk troubled by such dreams, doing exactly as written in that medievalists.net piece. He asks for street, Thomas Beckett's intercession, and in the story, the saint drives the incubus away for good. So the takeaway for medieval folks was, if you have a wicked nightmare, sprinkle holy water, call on Jesus or Mary, and the demon loses power. Now, beyond dreams, what about other furties and meriten, nightly practices regarding spirits? Many would recite an evening prayer specifically to be kept safe through the night. One common one, still known today, from later centuries went, "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." This particular rhyming prayer is 18th century, but it echoes older sentiments where sleeping was metaphorically like a little death, and one entrusts the soul to God. People might also invoke local saints known for protection. For example, Street, Christopher, patron, against sudden death, might be invoked so one doesn't die in one's sleep unprepared. Street, Raphael, an archangel, was believed to guard travelers and possibly could guard one's journey through the night's dreams. Nightly house rituals. Some households would bank the fire and say, "May God and the Virgin guard this house from fire and phantoms." There was practice in parts of Europe of drawing a cross on the ashes of the hearth at night for blessing. Similarly, children were sometimes taught to make the sign of the cross on their forehead before sleep, to ward off bad dreams. We should clarify that not everyone was terrorized at night. Often, night was just peaceful, especially in safe rural hamlets, or in summertime, night could be enjoyable sitting out under stars, etc. But our focus is on weird habits, beliefs. Certainly these dream and spirit beliefs count. Dream recording. Interestingly, some medieval people kept dream journals of sorts. There's the famous Dream of the Rood, an Old English poem where the dreamer envisions the cross speaking, and literature like Chaucer's Book of the Duchess or Pearl by the Pearl poet are cast as dream visions. So culturally, dreaming was also a literary device, often used to impart spiritual allegories. A common trope was the dream vision, where a narrator falls asleep and is transported to a fantastical realm to learn a moral lesson. Readers, hearers knew it was a dream, but took the message seriously. This shows a respect for dreams as conveyors of truth in disguise. Nightmare remedies. To gentle down the talk of nightmares, let's mention how they tried to prevent them in kindly, homely ways. Herbal remedies. Placing certain herbs under the pillow to induce pleasant dreams or ward off evil. For example, Street John's wort was known as fuga daemonum, demon-fleeing herb. Some would hang it over beds or keep a sprig under pillow for protection. Chamomile or lavender could relax and thus diminish bad dreams. Plus, they smell nice. Amulets. A small cross or a prayer scroll tucked under the bedding. Some wore a pewter medal of a saint or a tiny reliquary around the neck, even in sleep, as a safeguard. Crib charms for babies. Lullabies often doubled as blessings. One medieval English lullaby goes, "Ballo, my boy, lie still and sleep. It grieves me sore to hear thee weep," eventually asking Mary's help to watch the child at night. Mothers would make the sign of cross on an infant's forehead or trace a circle around the cradle saying a charm to keep fairies from stealing the baby. Fear of changelings, fairies replacing a baby with a sickly fairy child, was a fire, nocturnal worry in some folklore. Community belief. If someone had a particularly striking dream, they might go ask the village wise woman or priest. The priest likely would give a pious interpretation, or just tell them to pray and not worry. The wise woman might give a folky interpretation, or advise an offering like, "Sprinkle salt at your doorway," to keep the spirit out. It was important how others reacted. A supportive community might laugh off a neighbour's silly nightmare to reassure them, or if they thought it portentous, like dreaming of a comet or a flood, they might all join in extra prayers or small rituals to avert disaster. There's a sweet Middle English evening prayer I found in the Clerk of Oxford blog early that literally asks for protection from foul dreams and fantasies during the night. It shows how consciously they petitioned God to guard their minds in sleep. The line, "Kepe me this night from sinner also, inclinest that I may uprise," basically means, keep me from sinning in my sleep, like impure dreams, and from any foul visions, so that I may wake up clean and pure. Thus, they set a spiritual guard around their subconscious, soothing the night fears. In practice, a lot of these beliefs likely helped people externalize their fears. If a man woke from a nightmare, believing a mare demon had visited, actually gave him some mental relief. It's not just him going crazy. It was an outside force, and he knows what to do. Say a prayer to drive it off. In a way, these beliefs were coping mechanisms. Now, let's imagine a calm scenario weaving these elements. A little medieval girl named Agnes is frightened of the dark corner of the one-room hut where they sleep. She whispers to her mother that she saw something move there after the candle was blown out. The mother, rather than dismiss her outright, lights a tiny blessed candle stub and carries it to the corner, showing it's just the loom with a hanging blanket looking like a figure. She then leads Agnes in a simple prayer, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and makes the sign of the cross on her brow. From a shelf, the mother takes a dried bundle of herbs, rosemary and thyme, and tucks it under the straw mattress, telling Agnes, "These sweet herbs are Mary's blessing. No evil thing will come near where they smell this." The girl, comforted by the familiar clean scent and her mother's confident actions, snuggles back under the blanket. The mother perhaps starts softly humming a known lullaby, maybe recounting a nice dream she once had of angels in a field, to replace the fright in the child's mind with a pure image. Outside, a late owl hoots, and the child asks, "What's that?" The mother replies gently, "Only the owl keeping watch. He cries out to scare away any mice or bad creatures. See, even the birds guard us." In such a way, she reframes the night sounds as friendly or purposeful. Agnes smiles, her eyelids heavy now, and soon she drifts off to peaceful sleep, believing herself safe. Thus, through ritual, prayer, and narrative, medieval people found ways to soothe their fear of the dark unknown. Not unlike today, we might have nightlights or bedtime stories. They had candles and saints' tales. When morning came and the first grey light crept in, any nightmares or spectres of the night were dispelled by cockcrow and the assurance of another day. Folks often believed dawn had cleansing power. "The devil and ghosts fly at cockcrow" was a saying, reflecting ancient lore that evil cannot endure the first light. So the simple rural dawn held a sort of psychological relief. As we step out of this realm of midnight visions, let's remind ourselves that for all the talk of demons and spirits, the medieval night was mostly uneventful. People slept, dreamed perhaps oddly at times, but generally woke up intact. The beliefs and customs were their way to exert a little control over the mysterious. By invoking holy protectors and observing small rituals, they felt less alone in the dark, and if all else failed, there was always the tavern's good ale to ensure a dreamless slumber. Next, we shall quietly turn to how religion continued to influence even the structure of their night and morning routines. Beyond just warding off nightmares, the church's presence was pervasive, from evening curfews rung by the church bell to morning prayers at sunrise. We will explore how religious practices shaped nightly rituals and the break of day, always in a gentle, lulling tone as befits our sleepy history. So, leaving the remnants of dreams behind, we tiptoe into the church's domain now, with a dawn prayer on our lips. Religious influence on night routines and morning prayers. Throughout medieval life, religion was the guiding star, the framework around birth, work, sleep, and death. It is no surprise that it also touched the most tranquil parts of the day, the quiet evenings and the hopeful mornings. The church not only taught people how to pray, but literally marked time for them with the ringing of bells at certain hours. In this chapter, we'll see how faith shaped the rituals of saying goodnight and greeting each new day. Don't worry, we will keep the tone gentle and reflective, as if we too are villagers listening to the distant Compline bell or waking to a sunrise hymn. Evening bells and curfew. Imagine a small medieval town as twilight falls. A bell rings from the local church tower, slow and steady. This is the curfew bell from Old French couvre-feu, cover fire. On hearing it, townsfolk know it's time to finish up any outdoor tasks, bank their hearth fires for safety, and settle in for the night. In many communities, it was law or custom that after the curfew bell, fires should be damped to prevent nighttime blazes that could devastate a town of timber houses, and people should refrain from wandering the streets. So, that bell was both practical and a little spiritual. Its sound blanketed the town with a sense of closure, almost like a parent saying, "All right, children, time for bed now." Some churches rang a specific bell, often around 8 or 9 p.m., just for this. Families might kneel and say a short prayer together when curfew rang, perhaps an Our Father, before retiring. The bell's resonance would fade, and in that silence, one could feel a collective peace, knowing everyone heard it and was doing the same mindful extinguishing of flame and enjoining of God's keeping for the night. Compline and family prayer. For those not in monasteries but living ordinary lives, the idea of compline, the church's night prayer service, still influenced them. In some places, parish churches did have a simple compline service, or at least ringing the compline bell. Devout lay people might recite parts of compline at home. For instance, the canticle Nunc Dimittis, the Song of Simeon, Now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace, was associated with night, as Simeon speaks of departing in peace. It was apt for bedtime, symbolizing ending the day in peace. People who could read might have a book of hours, a devotional book, which included compline prayers, but many simply learned a few key prayers by heart. A common evening devotion was to say Psalm 9, one numbered 90 inches the Vulgate. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will not fear the terror of the night. A beautiful psalm, promising God's protection from dangers of night. In Latin or the vernacular, it comforted many. Some knew it by the title, Qui Habitat, from its first words in Latin. They might recite parts of it, or at least the sentiment that angels will guard you lest you dash your foot against a stone. Guardian angels and saints at night. As mentioned earlier, a bedtime prayer to one's guardian angel was popular. Another one was the Ave Maria, Hail Mary. The medieval church strongly encouraged Mary's intercession. People felt she, as a gentle mother, especially watched over mothers, children, and frankly, everyone in the vulnerable hours. There was even an old custom of saying 3 Hail Marys at bedtime specifically for purity and protection. Street, Simeon Stylites aside, a saint who bizarrely stayed awake atop a pillar, definitely not our model for restful sleep. Most saints' cults didn't directly involve sleep, but some local saints might be invoked against nightmares or for good sleep, such as Street, Apollonia, maybe for toothache that could keep one up, patroness of dentistry, so if a toothache troubled your sleep, you'd pray to her. Midnight prayers. We discussed how monks had midnight matins. Lay people typically did not wake at midnight to pray. They needed their sleep for labor. However, there were exceptions. Vigil of feasts. Sometimes on important feast eves, people might attend a midnight mass, like we still have midnight mass at Christmas. The experience of going to church in the dead of night, candles all aglow, was rare but memorable. Christmas midnight mass, for example, drew even the sleepy, or those far away, because it was such a joyful, special liturgy. To a child, being allowed to stay up and walk to church under the stars, perhaps seeing a tableau or crib of baby Jesus inside, hearing carols echo at midnight, that must have felt almost magical. Afterward, they'd go home in the wee hours, chilled but happy, and fall into bed, likely dreaming of the angel's Gloria. Other times, folks might wake and pray on purpose, prayer vigils for emergencies. If someone was gravely ill or dying, family might keep vigil all night, taking turns praying by the bedside with a blessed candle lit. The belief was prayer needed to be continuous to ask God's mercy at a critical time. Similarly, before some big undertaking, like a battle or a journey, a particularly devout person might spend extra time in prayer at night, perhaps not full-out vigil, but a father might quietly get up and kneel by the hearth to ask protection for the family, then return to bed. Morning bells and rituals. Now, the other end. Morning. As roosters crowed, Soon the church bells also pealed at early light. Many places had a bell for lauds, or prime, the dawn offices. There was also the famous Angelus bell. By late medieval times, after 13th century, it became common to ring a bell 3 times a day, at 6 a.m., noon, and 6 p.m. approx, and people would pause to recite the Angelus prayer, honoring the Annunciation to Mary. The morning Angelus specifically acted as a town alarm clock. It signaled it's time to begin work, but also to begin with prayer. A typical farmer on hearing the bell would remove cap, face toward the church or a cross, and say the Angelus. The angel of the Lord declared unto Mary, and she conceived by the Holy Ghost, etc., with Hail Marys interspersed. This short prayer, taking maybe 2 to 3 minutes, framed the morning. It's easy to see how calming and orienting such a practice was. Before any toil, one reminded oneself of the sacred. Even without Angelus, people had their personal morning prayers. One widespread habit, making the sign of the cross first thing on waking and saying, "In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit." It was a way to sanctify the day from the get-go. Some would memorize a short verse, for instance, an Old English verse. "I bless myself with the Holy Cross. God bless me from all evil things." In literature, Chaucer's characters often begin dialogues with "God give you good morrow," an acknowledgement of God's gift of a new day. So greeting others often included God's grace be with you this day. Waking up was itself a little thankful moment. Not everyone survived sleep. People did die quietly in their beds. Sometimes, more often then, due to lack of modern medicine. So there was a tiny relief each morning. Thank God, I see the sunlight again. Matins of Our Lady. Devout folks might attend an early mass or matins if available at the parish. Many guilds, lay religious brotherhoods, held early services, especially on certain weekdays. Songs and hymns. Just as lullabies soothed night, morning had its songs too. Monasteries sang beautiful Lord's hymns, praising the rising sun as symbol of resurrection. Villagers might not sing in Latin, but they had vernacular morning songs or just cheerful rhythms. Perhaps a mother opening shutters hums a local folk song about dawn, or ploughmen going to field might whistle a hymn tune taught by the parish. There's evidence of popular religious songs, for example. In the 15th century, one might sing, "Jesus, Son of Mary" stanzas for protection through the day, etc. House blessings. It's worth noting that houses themselves were often blessed at certain times, like Epiphany, where chalk was used to write 20 plus C plus M plus B plus year above doors, initials of the Magi, and Christus Mansionum Benedicat, Christ bless this house. These blessings, renewed annually, gave confidence year-round, including nights. If someone heard a bump at night and felt scared, they could recall, "But Father David blessed our home at Epiphany. No harm can come within these walls." Religion and sleep ethics. The church also offered advice on the moral aspect of sleep, cautioning against oversleep sloth, one of 7 deadly sins, and against slovenly habits. The rule of street. Benedict is strict that monks must arise promptly for prayer. No lazing about. Lay preachers echoed. The diligent rise early to attend mass or do chores. The lazy lie abed and invite poverty. There's a biblical proverb on that. So a good Christian was expected to strike balance. Get enough rest, too, do one's duties, but not indulge in idleness. Visions at night. If someone claimed a holy vision at night, like seeing an angel or a saint in a dream, telling them to do something, the church would investigate. Some saints, like Street, Julian of Norwich, an English anchoress, reported intense visions, though hers were more in sickness trances than ordinary sleep. The church was cautious with lay visionaries. Some were celebrated if their visions aligned with doctrine. Others were ignored or even condemned if they caused trouble. But privately, families might heed a grandmother's dream of a dead relative, requesting prayers. So next morning they'd go donate or pray extra for that soul, just in case. Community mornings. On Sundays, morning routines changed. No heavy work. Instead, washing up a bit more than usual, dressing in better clothes to go to church. They'd break fast after Mass, hence, break fast. Sundays could be restful afternoons, perhaps the only nap some men got was a Sunday nap after a good meal. Also, certain mornings were noted. For example, Easter morning. Many would wake before dawn to attend the Easter Vigil, which in those times was held at dawn on Easter, not midnight as today. Experiencing sunrise during Easter Mass was very symbolic of Christ's resurrection as the sun. Another is Street, John's Day, June 24, where some might wake at first light to gather herbs, believed to have strongest potency at that midsummer moment. So occasionally, religion even encouraged early rising for special blessings. Domestic piety at night. Households had small crosses or icons hung by beds. Before sleep, they might light a little lamp in front of such an image for a few minutes of prayer, then extinguish it. Those images provided comfort. For example, a carving of Mary with open arms or a serene Christ could psychologically guard one's sleep. In summary, faith bookended the medieval day. The simple acts, crossing oneself at night and morning, reciting a prayer or two, were anchors of stability. They also gave one a sense of not being alone. A medieval person may be in a dark room physically alone, but they believed God and saints and angels were invisibly present. This thought is deeply reassuring when night's solitude might otherwise feel lonely or scary. Also, knowing the whole community was observing similar prayers created solidarity. At the Angelus, you knew dozens of other villagers also paused to hail Mary. At night, you could imagine monks in the abbey nearby chanting while you slept, as if they were night watchmen of prayer on everyone's behalf. Let's close this chapter with a soft scene. Envision a tiny village as dawn breaks on a Sunday. A faint mist lies over the fields. One by one, thin plumes of smoke start to rise from cottage chimneys as hearths are kindled. The church bell begins to toll slowly, summoning to morning mass. In one cottage, a family has already been up. They said their morning prayers together, washed their faces in cold water, and put on their best tunics and kerchiefs. The mother lit a blessed palm from last Palm Sunday in the fireplace to help start the new fire, a folk way to carry last year's blessing into the new day. The father takes a moment aside to kneel and whisper a personal prayer. Lord, I thank thee for keeping us safe this night and granting us this new day. Guide us in thy house today. The children, excited to see friends at church, tug at their mother, and out the door they go as a family, walking down the lane as the golden sunlight strengthens. Their breath puffs in the cool morning air, but their hearts are warm with faith. Last night's fears or fatigue are gone. The morning prayer and bell have energized them. Such was the balm of religion on medieval sleep. It put each day and each vulnerable night in the context of a loving providence, and that is a thought as soothing as any lullaby. Now, we have explored nearly every aspect of medieval sleepy time except one fun area: how they tried to actively aid sleep and health with various remedies and superstitions. In the next chapter, we'll talk about herbal cures, special brews, and little rituals they used for better sleep and to ward off insomnia or bad luck. Basically, the medieval version of sleep hygiene and bedtime routines. Some ordinary, some a bit weird by our standards, but all part of that gentle quest for a good night's rest. Let's continue our journey with a cup of imaginary medieval herbal tea in hand. Herbal remedies, sleep aids, and superstitions. For as long as humans have been around, we have sought out plants and practices to help us sleep more soundly. The medieval period was rich in herbal lore, much of it inherited from ancient knowledge, like Greek and Roman medicine, and local folk tradition. By candlelight in the evening, a medieval housewife might brew a soothing concoction of herbs to ease her family into slumber, or a traveller might keep a sprig of a certain plant under his pillow at an inn to ward off nightmares. In this chapter, we'll explore the gentle, earthy world of medieval sleep remedies and superstitions, essentially the bedtime tips and tricks of that era. No need to fear, these are by and large comfortingly quaint or sensible, and we'll present them in the same slow, reassuring tone, as if we're old herbalists preparing a nighttime draft for a friend. Herbal teas and brews. Medieval people commonly used infusions, what we call teas, and decoctions, boiled brews, of various plants for health. For sleep and relaxation, some favorites were chamomile, chamomellum, nobile, a superstar, then as now, for calmness. Monastic gardens almost always grew chamomile. A 15th century text notes it, taketh away weariness and heaviness of the soul. They might steep chamomile flowers in hot water to make a mild tea to be sipped before bed. Chamomile was also used in baths, pouring a strong chamomile infusion into bath water to soothe the body. The apple sweet smell itself was thought to be sedative. If a child was fussy, a mother might give a spoon of chamomile tea with a little honey. Valerian Valeriana officinalis. Known in later centuries as well, valerian root has sedative properties. Medieval herbalists did use valerian, though it became more popular in the Renaissance. It smells rather musky, so they might mix it with other herbs. One medieval recipe called for grinding valerian root and adding it to wine, taking a spoonful before bed for when one's sleep is troubled by thoughts. They might not have fully separated anxiety and insomnia conceptually, but they observed valerian comforts the heart and brings quiet sleep. Hops, humulus lupulus. Yes, the stuff in beer. Hops are soporific. Monks who brewed ale noted that strong hop beer made people drowsy. An old trick was to stuff a little pillow with dried hops, a hop pillow, and it would act like a mild sedative as one inhaled its aroma. Some medieval folks did that, or simply drank a cup of small beer, weak ale, before bed as a nightcap, since it contained hops and also the alcohol. Though too much drink could disturb sleep later, they recognized moderate doses helped. Lettuce, Lactuca sativa. This might surprise us, but wild lettuce, Lactuca virosa, and even cultivated lettuce when bolted, has a white sap that is mildly sedative, lettuce opium. The ancient doctor Galen recommended lettuce in the evening to promote sleep. Medieval herbal guides repeated this. So, a remedy might be boil lettuce in water with a pinch of rose petals, drink the strained liquid, or simply eat a bit of lettuce with dinner. In an era without tranquilizers, a salad was genuinely seen as calming. Lavender, lavandula, angustifolia, mostly used for scent. Lavender was strewn on floors and in linens for fragrance. They knew its aroma was comforting to the brain and senses. A sachet of lavender under the pillow could ease falling asleep. Also, lavender in bathwater was used to relieve headaches and tension, indirectly improving sleep. Wealthier households could afford the imported oil of lavender. Others just gathered flowers from the garden. Rosemary, Salvia rosmarinus. While stimulating in large amounts, a bit of rosemary was thought to ward off bad dreams. It was more for memory, though, the saying, rosemary for remembrance. Some believed a wreath of rosemary on the bedpost kept evil spirits away. It has a strong smell that might mask foul odors as well. Maybe improving sleep by improving environment. Sweet flag, acarus, calamus, and costmary were lesser-known herbs, sometimes put in bed straw for fragrance. Spiced nightcap drinks. Medieval folk enjoyed warm spiced beverages in the evening, especially in cooler seasons. Mulled wine. Hippocras, a mixture of red wine, honey, and spices like cinnamon, ginger, cloves, sometimes stretched with water, served warm. This was considered not only delicious but medicinal, aiding digestion and closing the stomach for the night, preventing indigestion nightmares from heavy meals. Some recipes specifically said it rejoices the heart and causeth good sleep. Ginger can be peppy, but in small doses, and with wine, it likely relaxed. Hippocras is often associated with banquets. They'd serve it at end of feast, but common folk had simpler versions. A peasant might heat some cheap wine with a bit of pepper and herbs, if available as a nightcap. Ale posse. This is interestingly akin to our concept of warm milk. A posset was milk curdled with ale or wine, often with spices and sometimes egg, like an eggnog's ancestor. A nighttime posset was common for invalids and also as a sleepy drink. The dairy content has tryptophan indeed. The small alcohol content plus nutmeg etc. all incite somnolence. One 14th century household manual suggests a nutmeg posset for those who cannot sleep by cause of cough or evil humour. Milk and honey. Simpler people, if they had a cow or goat, might take a cup of warm milk sweetened with honey. They didn't know the biochemistry, but they found it comforting. A known remedy for sleeplessness from dryness was almond milk with sugar. Perhaps the oils helped. Herb wine or beer. They sometimes steeped calming herbs in wine. Beer. For example, putting some balm, lemon balm, Melissa officinalis in wine for a few hours, then drinking at supper time. Balm was said to chase away cares and lift mood, conducive to rest. Another tip was to mix a little vinegar of 4 thieves and herbal infusion vinegar in water at night for calm. Not sure if that worked, but maybe placebo. Physical aids. Medieval beds themselves could be modified for comfort. We learned about feather beds for rich, straw for poor. But beyond that, warming the bed. As mentioned, bed warmers, metal pans with hot coals, were used. Having a warm bed likely helped one fall asleep on a cold night much faster. We know being too cold disrupts sleep onset. Mosquito netting. In some areas, nets or curtains around beds weren't just for warmth or privacy, but kept out insects. While malaria was present in some parts of Europe then, netting like canopy drapes could at least reduce mosquito bites, improving sleep quality. Also, it prevented fleas, lice from other parts of the room, or drafts, etc. Not exactly a remedy, but a physical measure for better sleep. sound environment. People probably appreciated calming sounds. Perhaps they recognized the lull of crickets in summer or the white noise of rain. Conversely, dogs barking or drunken tavern noise would bother them, as it does us. In castles, with so many sleeping in one hall, they couldn't control snoring well, though maybe heavy tapestries dampened echoes. Not much evidence on deliberate soundscapes, but church bells marked times. Some might actually find the distant rhythmic chant of monks or a bell on the hour soothing, as it reassured that time is kept and all's well, like a grandfather clock chime in a house. Aromatherapy beyond herbs. They also used resinous incense like frankincense or myrrh in churches. At home, burning a bit of juniper or pine might clear smells and was believed to purify air, helpful in plague times, they thought. A pleasant-smelling home likely eased the mind. Superstitions for good sleep. There were quirky beliefs, passed down, perhaps as wisdom. Positioning. Some thought sleeping with your head, pointing a certain direction mattered. In parts of Europe, there was a saying to not sleep with head. North, some Asian cultures have that too. Interestingly, the reasoning varied. One idea: graves are oriented east-west, so you should sleep in the same orientation as corpses, which is east-west, to avoid summoning death inadvertently. Others believed north winds bring cold spirits. Hard to know how widespread, but these things often lingered in folk belief. Never sleep on churchyard wall. People believed places like churchyards or gallows sites had restless spirits, so avoid sleeping nearby or on a boundary of such. Protective objects. We mentioned iron under pillow, or a knife. Some folks did put a knife or piece of steel under a child's crib to cut off any witch's influence, or to stop fairies from taking them. The irony is, a real knife in bed is dangerous physically, but superstitiously they thought it safe. Many might opt for safer objects, like a piece of bread, blessed bread, or a psalm written on paper and tucked under pillow. Spiritual weapons. Don't sleep with feet towards door. In some regions, a corpse is carried out feet first through the door. So if you sleep that way, it's like inviting death. This piece of superstition still exists in some European and Asian cultures, so they might angle beds differently. Not sure how common, but perhaps among certain communities it was considered. Chime hours. There was also a belief, till today in some places, about times of night. For example, the hour between 3 and 4 a.m. was sometimes called the devil's hour, perhaps because it's opposite the 3 p.m. of Christ's death. If someone woke often at 3 a.m. and felt uneasy, they might think something supernatural is about. The remedy: say a quick prayer, like Michael Archangel prayer, and try to sleep again. Eating habits. They observed what foods gave bad dreams. Don't eat cheese before bed, it causes nightmares. Was a belief cheese, being heavy and harder to digest, indeed might cause restless sleep. Also, overly spiced or spoiled foods could upset humors and cause visions. So, a wise parent might caution their child not to sneak a hunk of that aged blue cheese at night, or they'll dream of witches. Blanket superstition. This one is possibly more modern, but some believe your body should be fully covered by blanket to avoid ghost or demon touches. Kids often feel safer, fully under covers. In medieval times, tucking children in tightly or swaddling babies was partly for warmth and comfort. Inadvertently, it also recreates a protected feeling. No ghost is getting under this snug coverlet. Prayer verses. Counting sheep. They likely didn't explicitly say, count sheep, though ironically, There's an 12th century Islamic text with a story of counting sheep to sleep, and possibly a reference in Spanish literature by early 1600s, but not sure about medieval Europe widespread. Instead, they'd advise saying repetitive prayers or psalms, essentially similar effect, monotonous, calming activity. One could recite the 150 psalms in one's head, if literate enough to know many by heart. That'd surely knock one out, or at least put the brain into a meditative state. Midnight stirs. If one woke in the middle of the night, not for prayer, but just naturally, and couldn't get back to sleep, some might interpret it superstitiously. Is someone thinking about me? Did a spirit poke me? But more practically, they might get up, have a sip of leftover ale or water, and perhaps even step outside to relieve themselves or get air. We saw before, they often accepted this wakeful period and did quiet activities. If someone struggled with insomnia a lot, a chronic issue, they might consult an herbalist or doctor who would likely prescribe some of the above remedies like warm milk, a certain diet, etc. Touch of Saint's relic. On pilgrimages, some got little souvenirs. For example, a scrap of cloth touched to a saint's tomb. Putting such a relic under the pillow was thought to bring not only protection, but maybe healing dreams or visions. If a person had trouble sleeping due to illness or anxiety, sleeping with a holy relic or even a blessed rosary in hand could psychologically alleviate that. A little story to illustrate an old remedy. A traveller arrives at an inn, but finds he's too wound up from the road to sleep. Perhaps the wind howls outside and he is anxious about bandits. The innkeeper, a kindly old woman, notices his restlessness and brews him a cup of warm spiced ale with a whisper of grated nutmeg. She also gives him a tiny sachet and says, "Lay this by your pillow. It's filled with chamomile and hops from our garden. It will give you pleasant dreams." The traveller thanks her, sips the ale by the fire until his eyelids droop, then retires. The room is humble but clean. He tucks the fragrant sachet near his head, and the gentle scent reminds him of hayfields and simpler times. He falls asleep, and indeed sleeps deeply, waking to morning light, grateful for the old innkeeper's remedy. We see in that little vignette the interplay of herbal knowledge and perhaps a dash of placebo, comfort. Many of these remedies likely worked as much by ritual and belief as by pharmacology, but some absolutely had biochemical effects, valerian, hops, etc. Finally, charms and rhymes. There were likely regional bedtime charms, short rhymes parents said over children, half prayer, half magic formula. For example, one could imagine a mother whispering, "By the thorn and by the rose, God grant my child peaceful doze. By the moon and by the star, no ill dream nor elf come mar." This is a made-up example, but very plausible of the type of sing-song charm used. In conclusion, medieval people were not entirely powerless over their sleep. They employed nature's pharmacy and the era's spiritual tools to create an environment conducive to rest. Many of their practices, a dark, quiet room, a comfortable bed, a light snack or warm drink, relaxing scents, a period of calm prayer or meditation, align surprisingly well with modern sleep hygiene recommendations, minus maybe the belief in demons. As we wrap up this meandering journey through weird and wonderful sleep habits of medieval times, one striking thread has been how universal some experiences are. The villagers humming lullabies, the knights tossing on a lumpy mattress, the monks waking at midnight, the anxious child clutching a talisman against nightmares. Across centuries, the quest for a safe and restorative night's sleep connects us. Their habits may seem quaint, but perhaps tonight when we prepare for bed, we might borrow a page from them, maybe sip a chamomile tea, turn off the harsh lights, say a little prayer or thought of gratitude, and imagine that in doing so, we join the long good night of history. Now we will move to our final chapter, drawing together what we've learned and bidding a gentle good night to the medieval world, hoping that this slow historical ramble has made you, dear listener, as drowsy as a full cup of posset would have made a weary ploughman. Onward to the conclusion, where we'll say farewell in proper sleepy fashion. How sleep changed over time in the medieval period. As we draw toward the close of our journey, it's worth reflecting on how sleep and nighttime practices evolved from the early to late Middle Ages, and how some of these changes set the stage for our modern sleep habits. Over roughly 1,000 years, 500 to 1,500 AD, a lot changed in society. Technology, architecture, beliefs, and daily life patterns. Yet much also stayed continuous. In this final chapter, we'll quietly contemplate those shifts and constants. Think of it as watching the slow sunrise of the early modern era from the gentle dark of medieval night. Early verses, late medieval sleeping arrangements. In the early medieval period, say around the 6th to 10th centuries, life was more rudimentary for most. Houses were smaller, often one-room huts for peasants. Many people, including nobility initially, slept in communal great halls or mead halls with minimal partitions. As we discussed, privacy was scant. By the high and late Middle Ages, 12th, 15th centuries, especially for better off, there was a trend toward more privacy and comfort in sleeping quarters. The invention and spread of the fireplace and chimney around the 12th to 13th centuries was pivotal. Earlier, halls had central hearths, which meant rooms had to be open, no chimneys. You couldn't easily have separate rooms with fires. Once chimneys allowed hearths against walls and heating of individual chambers, castles and homes started to have true bedrooms, the solar, the great chamber, etc. So, by late medieval times, it became more common for a lord to withdraw to a private bedchamber, leaving the retinue to the hall. Wealthy townsfolk might have an upper floor in their house for sleeping, separate from the shop or dining area. We even see the beginnings of a concept of children's beds separate from parents, though usually they still all shared a room until much later. Privacy and warmth together allowed people to have a more controlled sleep environment. Perhaps it also subtly changed intimacy and family dynamics. With a room door that closed, night became a bit more personal. Furniture advances. The late Middle Ages saw more ornate and comfortable beds for elites. 4-poster beds with tester canopies and curtains, not only functional for heat, privacy, but also status symbols. A rich merchant in 15th century Bruges might have a carved bedstead with a feather mattress, linen sheets. Linen became more available with flax cultivation, and fustian or wool blankets. Compare that to a chieftain in 8th century Saxon England on a simple plank bed with straw and animal skins. For commoners, improvements were modest but there. By later periods, even they might have a crude bed frame instead of just floor straw, and perhaps wool blankets from local weavers. Wool production boomed in late medieval economy. The idea of separate bed furnishings like pillows and bolsters also trickled down more. This likely improved sleep quality gradually. Less drafts with better houses, softer bedding, improving comfort, less waking from pain or cold. Urbanization and light. As towns grew and got more organized, 13th century onward, things like street curfews and eventually some street lighting. Late medieval, only in select wealthy cities and mainly by homeowners putting lanterns out. Widespread street lamps came in 17 th, started to appear. More nightlife in cities. There were taverns and some people out late despite curfew laws. City records often mention night watch catching tavern goers after hours. So in a bustling late medieval city like Paris or London, the night wasn't always completely dark or quiet. You might hear a distant lute from an inn, or see torches as a royal party went by at night. Still, it was dim and silent compared to days. However, by late Middle Ages, some affluent households had candlelight to extend evening activities. The cost of wax was high, but for special occasions they'd light many candles. Think of a late medieval Christmas party, the hall aglow. There's a sense that the wealthy might begin to split their day differently, maybe staying up a bit later with pleasurable pursuits or business talks by candlelight than early medieval folk who pretty much aligned with sunset. Segmented sleep, persisting. Even as times changed, the pattern of first and second sleep likely persisted until the early modern period, 17th, 18th, when artificial lighting and work schedules began altering it. Historian A. Roger Eckertsch's research, which we cited, finds references to first sleep and second sleep through the medieval and early modern era. It suggests our medieval characters would find the notion of one 8-hour knockout weird. They were accustomed to that midnight wakeful hour. Only later, under pressures of industrial time and better lighting, did continuous sleep become common. Scientific attention to sleep. Late medieval period didn't have sleep science, but they had the scholastic and medical theory of humours, and so on. Medieval physicians, like those at Salerno or later Renaissance figures, did write about best practices for sleep. For example, advice to not sleep immediately after a heavy meal. Good advice. To sleep on the right side first, then left to aid digestion, as per Greek medicine. To have fresh air, but not drafts, etc. These would be known at least among literate classes and trickle into household habits of those who had access to regimens of health books. So maybe by 15th century, a lord might have a physician who says, "My lord, don't eat that cheese tart at midnight. It will disturb your dreams." And he heeds it. That's a change from early medieval times when folk wisdom was the main guide. Shifts in belief emphasis. Early medieval nights were full of demons in imagination. The church hammered often about spiritual dangers in darkness. By late medieval, while belief in spirits remained, there was also more learned skepticism in some circles, like some physicians arguing incubus attacks were natural, bodily issues like indigestion or vapors causing hallucinations. We saw that even medieval medical writers offered physical explanations for nightmares and recommended stress reduction. Music, ointments, an early nod to psychological understanding. A 13th century doctor, Arnauld of Villanova, gave a description of sleep paralysis, the incubus feeling, that is strikingly accurate to medical explanation. So by late medieval, an educated person might be a tad less frightened of a nightmare, considering a natural cause, whereas a peasant probably still blamed a witch or demon. Over time, the Enlightenment would further push aside demonology from sleep issues, but that's beyond medieval. Social changes. Late medieval households among upper classes began having separate rooms for servants versus lord. Servants might sleep in their own quarters or antechambers rather than same room as lord. Castles even built separate barracks or servants' houses in the courtyard later. This meant the lord's family got more privacy at night, which arguably could improve sleep, less crowd, noise, and ability to set one's preferences. Meanwhile, servants likely still had communal conditions, but perhaps slightly less overcrowded as estates grew physically bigger. Bed-sharing norms. Through medieval times and beyond, sharing beds was common, out of necessity or custom. Only with more rooms and beds available in late period did the wealthy consider separate beds. Even then, husband and wife typically shared a bed for intimacy and also warmth, whereas later, centuries, 19th, wealthy sometimes had twin beds. But medieval, families, guests, often double up. There's a fun late medieval courtesy rule from Erasmus, or a similar source, advising not to bring fleas to bed that will bite your bedfellow, implying still multiple occupancy often. Inns remained multi-bed or multi-person per bed until modern era. In many cases, travellers often had to bunk together, hence the phrase, strange bedfellows, lifestyle and sleep duration. Some argue medieval people slept more overall, especially with all the holidays off. Juliet Shaw's work, as we saw, suggests a typical medieval peasant might have had more time off, and possibly plenty of sleep in off-season. However, come harvest or sowing, they probably had intense short nights. As society moved towards early modern proto-industry, there are complaints by 16th century of labourers working longer hours, especially as artificial light, first oil lamps, then gaslight, extended potential work hours into night in certain trades. But medieval period ended before widespread non-daylight work became routine. Candlelight was too expensive for mass labour use. It was more for leisure or intellectual work at night. The end of the medieval night. One symbolic moment often cited is the introduction of public street lighting in cities like Paris in the 1660 seconds, well beyond medieval. Before that, night belonged to darkness. The medieval period, in essence, maintained the natural night. It wasn't until Renaissance and later that human technology bit by bit colonized the night through better lamps, then industrial schedules, ignoring seasons. So in medieval times, whether early or late, night largely remained a time of rest and spiritual pause, relatively unchanged until the very end of our time frame. It's only with, say, the invention of cheap tallow candles, then whale oil lamps, 18th, C, then gas, 19th, then electric, 20th, that night becomes day-like. So our medieval friends would likely have very similar night experiences, if one from 500 AD and one from 1500 AD met, more similar to each other's than either is to ours, with smartphones and 24/7 light. A late medieval innovation though, clock towers. By 14th-15th centuries, many towns had mechanical clocks that rang bells on the hour. This meant at night, you could hear a bell toll, 2 a.m. perhaps. How did that affect sleep? Possibly psychologically, people became more aware of time intervals at night. Maybe one could think, oh, it's only 4 hours till dawn. I can sleep more, hearing a 2 o'clock chime. In earlier medieval, you'd judge by position of stars or just guess. Clocks made time more regimented gradually, even at night. To illustrate changes, in 800 AD, a monk might wake at some point. He guesses is midnight for matins. No personal clock, just internal, or seeing stars. Whereas in 1500 AD, A monastery might have a water clock or even an early mechanical alarm to more precisely ring Matin's bell at, say, 0. A peasant in 800 AD and one in 1500 AD both sleep after sunset, maybe first, second sleep, but the 1500 peasant might have a nicer wool blanket and slightly larger house with separate loft, plus hears distant town clock strike, whereas 800 AD, one in a tiny hut with just fire flicker, telling time roughly, and maybe animals, literally, in the same room. Continuities. Throughout medieval era, certain fundamentals remained. Reliance on sunrise, sunset, communal sleeping for most, belief in spiritual oversight of sleep, use of natural remedies, etc. So, one can say the biggest drastic changes in sleep came after medieval times with modernity, not within medieval times themselves, which were evolutionary, not revolutionary in this aspect. As we close our eyes on the Middle Ages, we can appreciate that while their world transformed in many ways, the human need for sleep and strategies to get it remained a constant thread. They passed on their lullabies, their herb lore, their prayers from generation to generation. So even as the medieval period ended and Renaissance dawned, a mother likely still rocked her child at night, singing an ancient cradle song. A farmer still looked to the evening star and murmured thanks for the day's end. Thus ends our gentle wander through castle halls and peasant cottages, monasteries, and midnight gardens. We've seen how medieval folk, not so different from us, sought comfort in the dark, whether through a down pillow or a whispered prayer. All these chapters, like beads on a rosary, have circled around one simple idea: the pursuit of a safe, restful sleep, wrapped in the fabric of one's culture and time. With the closing of the Middle Ages, the world was on the cusp of scientific awakenings, but those quiet, nightly routines carried on in many forms. Next time you fluff your pillow or sip chamomile tea, you can think of it as a small echo of our medieval ancestors' bedtime habits. Perhaps that thought itself is comforting. Across time, we join an unbroken chain of sleepers, dreaming under the same stars. Now, having journeyed so far, it's time for us too to find our rest. In a final conclusion, we'll settle our minds much as a medieval storyteller might say "Amen" at the end of a tale told by the fireside, and bid each other a good and peaceful night. Conclusion. Finally, our journey through the medieval night draws to a close. We have wandered from village huts to castle chambers, from monastery cloisters to moonlit fields, and seen that in those distant times, people cherished the same gentle comforts we do: a warm bed, a quiet prayer, the kindness of a lullaby. The strange and weird habits of medieval sleep turn out not to be so bizarre after all, once understood in context. They segmented their slumber into first and second sleeps as naturally as breathing. They shared beds out of necessity and community. They told stories and used herbs to smooth the path into dreams. Through the soft chapters of this narrative, we have imagined the unusual sleep habits in medieval villages and castles, from peasants curling up with livestock on a straw pallet, to nobles dozing upright in curtained beds for superstitious reasons. We listen to the night watches, the town guard's lantern footsteps, and the midnight monk's chant bridging that eerie gap between first and second sleep. We peeked at their simple, or lacking, hygiene and bathing routines, and learned even a once-a-week bath with fragrant herbs could feel luxurious. We sat in on castle dinners by torchlight, seeing how etiquette and ritual, even at day's end, gave a sense of order and peace. We tiptoed into the monastery dormitory, finding solace in the great silence and the certainty that a bell will call to prayer and then to rest again. We followed the peasants' year, observing how winter's long nights meant abundant slumber, while summer's brief darkness and noon naps balanced out the toil. We explored medieval dreams and fears, realizing a whispered Ave Maria or a sachet of rosemary was their shield against the terrors of the night. The religious rhythms, curfew bell, compline, matins and morning angelus, were like a soothing melody that cradled their sleep on a framework of faith. Their herbal remedies, chamomile, hops, valerian, and little superstitions, a knife under the bed, a prayer to street Raphael, were the tender tools with which they crafted a good night's rest. And finally, we watched how over centuries these patterns shifted gradually, how chimneys and clocks and changing attitudes prepared the way for a more modern sleep, yet how the essence remained. Night is for renewal, for safety, for dreams. If there is a single image to hold on to from all this, perhaps it is that of a medieval family at bedtime. Envision a small timber-framed cottage on a starry night. Inside, the fire in the hearth has burned down to a gentle glow. A father has just finished a quiet prayer. A mother has wrapped the children in a patched but clean wool blanket. An elder grandmother hums a remembered lullaby, maybe something like, "Sleep, sleep, my knave. The angels guard thee safe. Both waking and sleeping, God be thy keeping." The crickets chirp outside as everyone settles. Beyond their door, one by one, other cottages go, dark as the village yields to slumber. The church bell has struck 9. Now, only silence and the occasional distant owl's call reign. Under the watch of the dim heavens, these villagers dream perhaps of next spring's fields, or a better harvest, or simply enjoy the blank relief of rest after a hard day. They trust that come dawn, the sun and the bell will call them to life again. In that trust, they find peace. So, as we end this boring history for sleep, let us take comfort in the continuity between those past lives and our own. The details of how we sleep may have changed. Our mattresses are different, our nights less dark, but the core need for restoration and the little rituals we devise to get it are timeless. The medieval knight saying his prayers before bed, the nun lighting a taper before an icon, the peasant child clutching a handmade doll. These scenes could be mirrored today in our own bedtime routines of checking the door lock, reading a gentle book, or hugging a teddy bear. We all seek that sense of security as we close our eyes. If you listen to these chapters as a way to drift into sleep, perhaps by now you are floating on the edge of dreams yourself. Maybe the voices of history, the lullabies, the church bells, the whispering herbs, have merged into a soft chorus in your mind. You can let go of any waking worries and imagine you're in a safe medieval inn, warm under a woolen coverlet, a faint smell of lavender in the air, and a kindly innkeeper has just banked the fire. Outside, the night is calm, and 1,000 stars, unpolluted by any bright city lights, twinkle down, unseen by you, but watching like silent guardians. Tonight, you share in the same hope that medieval people voiced in their evening prayers. Lord, grant us a quiet night and a perfect end. Night after night, century after century, humans have yearned for, and thankfully often found, that gentle oblivion of sleep to heal the day's exertions. It is heartening to know that in the grand tapestry of history, the pattern of night rest keeps reweaving in similar designs, connecting us with those who came long before. Now, it is time for us to take our rest as well. Imagine a medieval storyteller by the dying fire saying, "And so ends our tale. May you sleep in peace, guarded by angels, till morning light." In that spirit, we conclude this narrative. We hope you found it not only informative but soothing, a kind of verbal pillow to support your journey into slumber. In the words of an old medieval blessing, "Christ watch over thy sleeping, and Christ be with thee in thy waking." Good night, and God rest to you.